So, I'd just like to start by saying that I'm new to this place and this is my first story, so please bear with me if I'm not doing this right. This story that I'm about to share is actually what I joined this community for, on my quest to find out if this is what happened to anyone else, that is. This is 100% true and is really hard for me to share because anytime that I've tried to tell someone else about this, I get laughed at and accused of just trying to pull their leg. I recently saw an article about a woman who was apparently hunting and saw an invisible cloaked creature that she described as almost like a predator from the movie of the same name. I read her story and saw the picture that she took of said predator, and as for her picture, I personally think that it's a combination of flare from the sun and a close-up of possibly her face or something. I'm not dismissing her story though, actually quite the opposite, since I too have encountered something similar, and is what prompted me to seek out if anybody else has encountered a predator in the woods. So, here's what happened. When I was about 5 years old, I was playing by the edge of the woods behind my grandmother's house. I played there often, and my grandma just kept an eye on me from the kitchen or the living room or whatnot, because the house had huge windows that faced the woods. She would come out every once in a while just to see what I was up to. I was obsessed with digging in the dirt at the time, and collecting unusual rocks and arrowheads that littered the land where my grandmother lived. I should mention too that this is Midwest Illinois, not too far from the mounds up there, so finding arrowheads was actually not that uncommon. Anyway, that day I remember picking out a spot to dig. I had been out there for quite a while because I remember I had a pretty decent sized hole going, when something caught my eye up in the tree that I was next to. I almost don't know how to explain it, but it looked almost like a heat wave coming off the branch of the tree. It was fall. I remember this because I had my jacket on, and remember thinking that my mum was going to be really angry because I had dirt around the bottom of the arms from digging. I also remember there being a lot of leaves on the ground. Anyway, I'm staring at this heat wave and realize that it has a bit of a human shape. So here I am, 5 years old, and wondering why there's an invisible man in the tree. I remembered feeling scared but unsure what to do. Then it started moving and making a faint sort of clicking sound. This is about the time that I decided that I was not supposed to be seeing this, and I hightailed it back to the house. My grandmother saw that I was pretty shaken up, and I remember telling her that I had just seen an angel. In my 5-year-old mind, I don't know what else it could have been. I had never heard of aliens or ghosts or monsters, so to me it had to be an angel because that's all my little mind could think of. Anyway, fast forward to when I'm about 12 years old. By this time the encounter was way out of my mind. I loved watching action and sci-fi movies. My dad rented a movie called The Predator, and I'm watching it with him, and the first time that you see the Predator, or invisible cloaked thing, man, I just about soiled my pants. All the memories from that day digging in the dirt came flooding back. I even asked my dad if the Predator was real, or if he knew anyone or any animal that had cloaking abilities that I didn't know about. He told me that it was all fake. It wasn't like it was today where I just had to Google it. I had no access to the internet, so again, I just put it out of my mind. Fast forward to about the year 2004 though. I'm now grown, I have 3 small children. I just went through a separation and I moved to the next town over to an apartment with my kids. These apartments are all one-level duplexes, with there being 5 buildings. I'm at the very last apartment of the last building. The apartments are considered in town, but are on the outskirts. There's a deep ditch that runs behind the buildings with a chain-link fence that separates the backyard from the ditch. There are about maybe 6 or 7 trees on our side of the fence. If you follow the ditch a little bit, you hit a sort of small forest that eventually leads to the country with a larger forest and farmland. So I'm a bit of a smoker myself, but would not smoke in the apartment because of the kids, so I often went out the back porch to light one up. And one night I was up late doing laundry and stuff after the kids went to bed. I decided to take a smoke break before I myself went to sleep. I'm back there on the porch and I started hearing this faint clicking sound. I immediately looked to the ditch because I had seen a groundhog out there a few days before and thought perhaps that he was out there again. The yard is faintly lit from the outside light that is by the playground, that is to the right of my back porch. I didn't turn on my porch light, I didn't normally anyway, if I was just going out for a quick smoke. I didn't see any groundhog or movement from the ditch, so I go back to smoking my cigarette. The faint clicking sound, though, keeps happening, and a slight shift of movement makes me look up into the tree to the left of my porch. And it was there, that same invisible thing that I had seen all those years ago. It was like a distortion and in a humanoid shape. It was crouched down on the branch with an arm out holding onto the trunk of the tree, and honestly, I couldn't quite believe my eyes. I was like, is this really happening? Has it come to kill me from seeing it all those years ago? All I could think about was my kids in the apartment sleeping, so I ran in and I slammed and locked the door behind me. I ran to the kids' rooms and I made sure all the windows were locked. Then I just turned out the lights in the living room and stared out the blinds at the tree to see if I could catch another glimpse of it. I sat there for maybe about a good 10 minutes and I couldn't see anything. I began to think that maybe I was just tired and my mind was playing tricks on me. And just as I was finally talking myself down, my neighbor's dog comes running across the yard and starts barking at the tree at that same branch that I had seen this predator thing. That pretty much freaked me out because this dog was not a barker by any means. I actually had never heard him bark at anything really, even at the groundhog that had been hanging out at the ditch. This barking went on for a few good minutes until I hear the neighbor lady who owns the dog call him back inside. The dog reluctantly turned to go back home, stopping every few feet to look back at the branch of the tree until he was out of my sight. I didn't sleep that night, and I've never seen anything like that again. I really don't know what to think of it too. I'm a grown person now, I have kids and a good career. I just want to know if anybody else has ever had an experience like this, I guess. I know what I saw, whether you believe it or not, and if you've sat here and listened to this, then thanks for hearing me out. I hope that I can get some answers someday, but the way things are going, I'm really not optimistic. So this incident happened a few days ago. I work at a bar and will usually travel home between 12:30 and 1:30 in the morning. In the warm months, I'll usually use my bike or electric scooter, and on this night, I was riding the scooter. I was only a few minutes away from home at this point, but I had heard my phone go off a couple of times in my purse, so I decided to stop a moment to make sure that it wasn't anything important. I realized that this probably wasn't the greatest decision, but I don't normally get notifications like that so late at night. So I go to pull over on the sidewalk near a sloped entrance into a plaza that has a couple of bushes on either side, and on the left side there's a stone fence of sorts, or more plants I guess, but I would have been maybe 15 or 20 feet away from the left at that point. And as soon as I stopped and went to get out my phone, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. It was a tall, thin man standing up from where he had been hiding in the bushes on the left side of the entrance. He was looking right at me. He said something that I couldn't really make out and started to walk toward me. At that, I immediately got on the scooter and drive and back onto the road after that. I don't ever stop and talk to people at this time of night as a matter of principle, but anyone hiding in the bushes at 1 a.m. certainly isn't someone that I want to be dealing with. Sadly, things like this happen a lot here, though this instance was definitely one of the creepiest that I've experienced. And yeah, I definitely realized that I shouldn't have stopped, let alone when I was so close to home like that. And I guess the lesson here is Don't make the same mistake that I did. Always be vigilant when you're out at night, especially alone, because you just never know who might be hiding in the bushes, waiting to pounce at the right moment. One year ago, I was on an app, a local app, where you could talk to people who were within your area. I met a nice girl there, and we also had common interests. We hit it off right away and exchanged numbers and pictures. Everything was perfect. A little too perfect, in fact. She was all over me, saying stuff like, "You're a gentleman," and which I am, I guess, but she was obsessed with me, though, and I'd never had a girl like that before. Even though she wasn't the best-looking girl, she made me feel a certain type of way, I guess. And then, at some point, we wanted to meet, normally on a Saturday afternoon, and had a nice time. We went then at some point to hers and did the deed and that, and had a great time. I tried to sleep at this point at her home, but she didn't want me to. I thought that maybe she had lost interest because of my poor performance, but couldn't be bothered at that point and went on with my day and left the house. And no, she didn't lose interest at all. She asked me if I arrived well after I got home, maybe 30 minutes later. And after that, nothing really special happened, just normal texting about life and stuff. Until 2 weeks later, when I was done with my studies, I wanted to see her again, but something was different. The way that she wrote, without emojis and more direct. And when I wrote her, she almost instantly replied, which is kind of different because she always took her time. That's how I knew her as, and I just wanted to have my way with her and didn't care that much, but it was almost like another person is behind her mobile phone at this point. I didn't care though and said that I'll pick her up with my car at her house, but no, she said that I would meet her at a local park because she has to get fuel anyway. The location that we were supposed to meet was a local park, but she wanted to meet when it was already kind of dark, which obviously was a bit suspicious, but at that time it just all seemed a bit normal to me. But I said, why there of all places, and she told me not to ask any dumb questions, and just said be there on time. I replied LOL, okay, and when I was there and was waiting for her, she came 10 minutes later, but I didn't care to be honest. I was just happy that I could see her again. She parked her car and for some reason I just got a really weird feeling. I knew that something just wasn't right, but just couldn't put my finger on it. I checked the location, was looking left and right if there was anything wrong. Also checked the bushes, but there was no one ambushing me or anything. She also didn't come out for the next 2 to 3 minutes, and I was like, yeah, that's just a bit weird. I could not see into her car because the windows were tinted, so I really couldn't see through the windows and stood maybe 20 to 30 meters away from it. I was waiting for her to come out of her car, but she never did. I was smiling, probably because of nervousness, and thought that she was playing just an unfunny joke on me, but then suddenly I get a call. I pull out my phone, and it was her. As soon as I pulled out my phone and saw her name, I heard doors open, but not one door, 2 or possibly even more. The way the car was parked was horizontal, so you couldn't really see if there were more passengers who opened the door at that point, but one thing that I knew was my body instantly went into fight or flight mode, and I knew that something was extremely wrong here. I ran for my life, and I didn't look back at who or what exited the car at this point. After I managed to escape, I deleted and blocked her number. I believe to this day that maybe she cheated on her boyfriend and he somehow found out and wanted to beat me up or do some serious harm to me or something. I've heard all the stories in news about how people lash out because of a cheating fiance or wife, and I didn't want to be another statistic. I don't even believe that she was in the car, to be honest. Probably just 2+ dudes who intended to do some harm to me. I was kind of surprised how fast I could run, to be honest, when I actually tried to. Perhaps because of the adrenaline, I guess. But yeah, I can't say for sure that that was the scenario or if there was something more to it. Either way, I'm just really glad that I got out of there when I did. So it takes me, a 23-year-old female, about 4.5 hours to drive home when visiting my family. When I have 2 hours left, my gas tank is half full, so I always stop to get gas at the rest stop. This time I really had to use the restroom, and so I just wanted to quickly pull into the first pump that I saw available, pump gas, go to the restroom, and be on my way. When I pulled up, there was a car at the pump in front of me, and a man was getting gas. Now, he was staring at me when I pulled up behind him, which I never gave a second thought to because I find it to be pretty common, to be honest. I mean, I do the same thing when a car pulls up behind me. But here's the thing. As I'm doing my thing with putting my card in, opening the gas cap, etc., I noticed that he was still staring at me through my peripheral vision. When I looked over, he would look away. When I get gas, my parents always told me to be aware of my surroundings, and so as I pump, I do a bit of a routine of looking to my left, right, in front, and behind. And this man was still watching me. So at this point, I'm just sort of staring back at him. His, who I assumed to be because they looked identical, son gets out of the car, says something to him in his ear, and switches places with him. Now, this man is walking towards me, but jerks his body to the passenger side of my car and gets close to look in as he walks by. Great, I think. He's trying to rob me now. Well, good luck because my door is locked. Thanks, Mum and Dad, for that tip. He was walking around my car pretty closely while staring at me, pauses for a second, and then quickly goes inside the convenience store. I will say that it did look like he wanted to say something, but I was more focused on finishing up at the pump so I could do my thing inside and quickly leave. I had my pet with me in the passenger side of the carrier, so when I grabbed him, I noticed a pump attendant, which is never common, standing at the trash can across from me. I said, "Hey, I'm just heading inside for a sec, but I'll be right out." He smiled and told me not to worry. Now, you're probably wondering, why didn't you just go somewhere else? Well, 1, I don't fear men generally. 2, I purposely grabbed the attention of the pump attendant to show that I was traveling alone as a female. 3, I really had to use the restroom, okay? Cut me some slack if you think that I'm going to let the male species prevent me from tending to my needs. And 4, in all seriousness, as a female, I'm used to men staring at me and being a bit creepy sometimes. I know what I can handle, and this really didn't seem like it was out of place. So when I go into the store, I notice him heading to the men's room. I purposely chilled a little longer so I wouldn't run into him and leave. I made nice conversation with a lady and her kid. And post-restroom break, I grabbed a drink from the cooler, and this man came right up against me to get a drink. I quickly turned and walked away. I thought that he was gone at this point and realized that he must have been waiting for me. I dodged him a few more times inside, and he finally left. I paid and walked out after the man was already in his car, but when I walked to my car door, my heart sank. A paper was slipped in the handle, and my mind went straight to trafficking because I remembered a girl with a similar story of how she found a paper in her handle and it made her sick when she removed it. I thought, well, it finally reached this point for me. My first thought was to immediately go inside and grab an attendant. Why didn't I quickly get in the car and drive off? Because the man's car was still parked in front of mine. I didn't want him following me and possibly forcing me into something like an accident, causing me to be alone with him, since the highway was pretty empty today, until we wait for the police to show up at least. But I noticed the pump attendant, who was standing on the other side, was now at the trash can next to my car. He handed me some napkins and I took the paper out, and as soon as I did that, the man and his son drove off as I went to throw it away. So I went to a Catholic school growing up, solely because they had the best education in my small town. Therefore, having sisters and priests as teachers, I was never a fan of either of them, as I was not super religious growing up. It was just something that I had to do at this school. But this all changed one day after a conversation with one of the priests at the school. So my school had an exchange program with another Catholic school in California. so that every year a few kids in each grade and a priest or sister would go down and we'd get some new people at our school. My freshman year, we had a priest who I'll call Father V. He was an older man, maybe late 60s I would guess, who taught English and religion classes. A big guy, maybe 6'3" or 6'4", and strong, stocky build. He grew up on a farm in Oregon, said that he was always a troublemaker as a kid, always got into trouble at school, drank and smoked at a young age, just doing what kids in small towns would do back then. But he was honestly one of the coolest people that I'd ever met. Super eccentric, never once seen him mad, and always had a huge smile on his face, but certainly a no sort of bull type of guy. He'd play the Stones and Skinwalker during class and always made time to help anyone out after class or school for papers. My friends and I always asked for his help since he was a very sharp man as well, especially with English. Spent countless hours with him after school that started out as help, then eventually just morphed into discussions and stories about life, specifically his. When he graduated high school, he actually had joined a band, which was really more of a gang in his words, and started getting into trouble with the law and whatnot. After a few years, he actually went to jail, got stabbed and nearly bled out, said that he prayed to God that if he lived, he would devote his life to him. So that's what he did, joined the priesthood the day that he got out of jail. They put him through schools all over the world, said that he met so many cool people and a lot of weird ones too, and one day after class, my friend and I had nothing to do, so we were waiting on our parents to pick us up a few hours after school. So we decided to go to Father V's room and pick his brain. Now, somewhere in the conversation, we somehow got onto the topic of God. Not hard with the priest, I know, but we had asked him for proof of God, being snarky teens just trying to pull a gotcha on him. He gave us the Bible, Jesus, proof through followers, all the typical mumbo. But we told him, yeah, whatever, but then he got serious like I'd never seen before. His eyes got sharp and there was no more smile. Straight-faced, he told us, "You know, if you believe in God, that means that you believe in the devil, right?" We laughed. He didn't. And this confused us, so we asked what he meant. So clearly and confidently that it raised the hairs all over my body, he said, "The devil is real and I've seen him." We immediately asked him what he meant and to tell us. So he said, when he was still a young priest and back in the States, he was working with an elder priest in Cali in a small town. One day they got a call from the local sheriff to come out to help with a problem at a family's house. The sheriff told them over the phone that the 5-year-old girl in the family was apparently possessed. Father V said that they got to the home and the sheriff and the parents of the girl were sitting outside praying on their knees in front of the home. He then said that they could hear a noise coming from inside the house that he could only describe as a cat snarling but in a much deeper pitch. Said that he had never heard anything like it before or since then. When they entered the home, the noise immediately stopped. Not knowing what they were in for, they began to go towards the little girl's room, and the power in the house was out. It wasn't working, even after flipping the breakers multiple times, so they had flashlights with them. When they got to her room, they couldn't get the door open. It wasn't locked, but there was something blocking the door. They only found out later that the girl had somehow ripped her wardrobe, which had been nailed into the wall, and put it in front of the door apparently. All this time he said that there was this loud cackle coming from the room, almost like a witch but a really deep male voice. They managed to knock the wardrobe over with him, the other priest, and the sheriff all shouldering and kicking at the door multiple times. Once they managed to get in, there were no windows in the room, so it was absolutely pitch black. Once they entered, though, he said that he heard scurrying across the floor and then up the wall. They shined their flashlights up the wall to see the little girl in the top corner of the ceiling upside down, completely black eyes, and the most heinous smile that he'd ever seen. Completely spooked, all 3 men immediately left the room and shut the door. The girl with the man's voice started howling with laughter and kept repeating, "I just want to play." The men gathered themselves, began reading scripture, and re-entered the room. This seemed to have zero effect on the girl, though, who only laughed harder and harder at the men while still upside down in the top corner of the room. This went on for several minutes, apparently, until the older priest stopped reading scripture, looked at the girl, and commanded in Jesus' name that this spirit leave. The girl fell to the floor and began screaming, almost like an animal being thrown into a fire, as he described. The man grabbed the girl and put her on the bed and held her down as the old priest read more scripture while she foamed at the mouth. This seemed to be working for a while, until the older priest attempted to splash holy water on her. Father V said that the water just instantly vaporized when it touched her skin. She let out a growl like a dog and threw the sheriff off of her like it was nothing, and scratched Father V across the stomach that drew blood. The girl then started speaking in Latin and referring to all the men through their father's name, ex-son of John. Father V said the only thing that saved them that day was that the older priest knew Latin. He began shouting back at the girl in Latin, demanding the spirit to leave the girl's body. After many hours and attempts, the girl let out in what Father V could describe as the most demonic voice that he had ever heard. "I am Lucifer, the king of the underworld. I have ruled this earth before and will rule again." The girl then apparently just passed out, woke up a few minutes later puking up black sludge and what seemed to be locusts or insects of some sort. And then she recovered. Now, me and my friend, after hearing this tale, looked at each other and couldn't help but giggle, to be honest. But Father V stared at us with a blank face, let us finish our laugh, then stood up, pulled up his shirt, revealing 4 long claw mark-like scars across his entire stomach. Now, I'll never know if this story was completely fabricated or not, I know that. But 2 things I do know, though. Father V believed his story to be true, that much was clear. And the other is that I will never forget this story as long as I live. I used to work as a cashier at a local grocery store when I was a teenager, back in the 90s. I usually worked the closing shift on Fridays and Saturdays. There was a rough-looking old man that would often come in to purchase a few beers. For whatever reason, he was obsessed with Nostradamus and claimed that he was able to predict the future and that he knew when the world was going to end. Normally, I just ignored him, but one night, when I heard him talking to a cashier a few lanes down, I snickered to myself and said, "What a whack job." I really don't know how it happened, but suddenly the man was standing right in front of me with this creepy, intense stare. He simply said to me, "You're going to die tonight in a car crash." And then he turned and walked out of the store. I don't know what it was about how he said it, but it freaked me out. I called my mum crying, and she offered to come and pick me up and drive me home after my shift. She said that he was just a crazy guy and to pay it no mind. But after that, I never saw the guy come in again. Obviously, I didn't die in a car crash that night. But since then, I've been in 7 car accidents. None of them caused by me, mind you. But the most severe one was when I was in my 20s. I was T-boned in an intersection by a drunk driver. The car flipped a few times and landed upside down. The friend that I was with unfortunately passed away, and I had to be cut out of the car with some jaws of life. I remember coming to as the paramedics pulled me from the vehicle. I was surrounded by shattered glass and so much blood that I genuinely thought that I was dying. In fact, I almost did die. When my mum got the call, she thought that I was dead, and it's honestly a miracle that I survived with only a few minor injuries. But the words of that guy, they still definitely haunt me. And I mean, it is weirdly coincidental that after that guy said that thing that I have been in just so many accidents. My mum's colleague lives alone. No partner, parents or children, just a dog to keep her company. But every year during the summer, the holidays that is, she invites her cousins, so her sister's children, to spend an evening with her. They watch movies, play games, and eat candy. The children absolutely love it. As she lives alone, she has only one bedroom. When she's having a sleepover with the cousins, she lets the children sleep in that bedroom and she herself sleeps on the couch downstairs. So last summer, she organized a sleepover with her cousins as usual. It was fun and she had just put the children to sleep in her bedroom. Tired but satisfied, she plopped down on her couch and soon fell asleep. At around 3 a.m. though, she was woken up by her dog barking restlessly. This was pretty abnormal because her dog never really barked at night. Still half asleep, she got up from her couch and walked over to her dog to see what was going on. She bends down to pet her dog and says, "Hey, what's wrong, buddy?" And as she says this, she hears someone behind her in the darkness respond, "I don't know either." She started screaming and immediately ran upstairs to lock herself and the children in the bedroom and call the police. In the end, it turned out to be just a drunk man who had entered the wrong home. But man, I would be terrified if this ever happened to me. This happened about 5 or 6 years ago. So I went home by bus and then got off as usual and then went the route that I always do to get home. It was an evening and I passed a man and he looked at me and had a sort of angry expression on his face, as if I was someone familiar or like he knew me from somewhere and as if I had done something wrong to him. I didn't think too much of it and went on normally, and then I just had a gut feeling to look behind me at some point. The man just went on, but slower pace, and then eventually he passed me, and a few seconds later I looked behind again, and he also looked over his shoulders. I started to feel weird and got goosebumps all over my body at this, and started to walk quickly. Eventually he turned around and followed me. I tried not to show fear and went on at a slightly faster walking pace until maybe after a few meters, because there was a corner, and after I passed the corner I ran as fast as I could. At some point I stopped running and thought that I had lost this guy, and thought that it was just some weirdo drunken bum or something. But all of a sudden I was approached and stopped by a man who looked familiar to the same person, just his hair was way shorter and he had a beard, and asked me if I had any euro on me. I denied him and said that I had no money with me, which was a bit strange. I was never really approached at that time, especially this late in the evening where somebody would ask me for money. The man just wouldn't let it go though, and he was acting as if somebody had maybe told him to stop me or something. Like, no matter what, just keep the person, me, standing on one point as long as possible. While he was still talking to me and saying that he was really hungry, I just kept walking and said that I'm really sorry and that I really do have no money. And then sort of surprisingly, he just all of a sudden dropped off. I went a few meters, and then as I looked back to see what the guy was doing, who asked me for the euros, I saw the first person again and my heart instantly sank. I went on quickly. I tried to take detours to lose him. I didn't want to let him know that I was afraid of him, and that's why I didn't run again. While I was going fast, I wrote a text to my parents and siblings via WhatsApp so that they would open the door before I arrived. I told them that I wasn't too far away to unlock the door and that this crazy guy with a long unkempt beard just wouldn't leave me alone and seemed to be following me. This person, whoever he was, didn't seem to let go of me either. Eventually I almost arrived home and the man was still behind me at this point. Now, before you get to my house, you have to pass a carport, so I was at the carport and there was this sort of corner, and I looked behind before I passed the corner, and the man was maybe 15 to 20 meters away from me. Then, while I passed the corner, I ran as quickly as I could with all the adrenaline in my body now flowing straight into my house. I did this so that hopefully he couldn't make out which house I actually lived in. I tried to hold my composure when I got home. I didn't want my parents or my siblings to creep out since We had a lot of problems anyway, like private stuff and financial stuff, but they knew that something was wrong since my face was quite pale, and I swear that if you looked closely enough, you could actually see my heart beating through my t-shirt. I was terrified. For the next few days as well, our doorbell would ring in the evenings at strange times. My father at one point went down the stairs to open the door, and I immediately went down the stairs as fast as I could and told him that we should not open the door. I explained to him that there was some weirdo around the village trying to sell stuff for televisions or something like that so that he would keep the door closed. At that time, and I still do to this day, I believe that the person who rang the bell at that time, it was the same guy who had passed by me and followed me all the way home that day. He tried to find out which house that I lived in, I think. I live in a house with lots of houses around me, right next to us, in fact. And I'm still glad to this day that my parents somehow believed me and they didn't ask any further questions. I also had a few neighbors with whom I got along pretty well with, and we sometimes talked about life and stuff, and they also told me the same thing that happened to us had happened to them, that somebody would ring at very strange times at their house in the late evening, and I was shocked but tried my best not to act out and said, "Wow, that's crazy." They also couldn't make out who the person was. They said that no normal person opens the door when it's late like that, which I agreed on, so they never really got a good look at the person. For a second, I did want to tell them about my encounter with that creepy person, but at the same time I was pretty insecure at that age, and I didn't want people that I'm close to think that I was some weirdo or something. I guess the one question that I always ask myself, though, is what would have happened if the man had seen which house that I had gone into? What would he have done to me, or possibly even my family? I still get goosebumps thinking about it, and luckily the ringing was only every day, but in total for only a week. And then it finally stopped. Also, the way the person rung the bell was really weird as well. It was like a ring, then a pause for 2 seconds, and the same way 4 times. And this happened every single time, so whoever was coming around late in the evenings, ringing our doorbell, it was definitely the same person. I do sometimes wonder if maybe he was just confused with somebody that he knew from somewhere or something, and he thought that I was that person. Like, for example, maybe a guy that cheated with his wife or something. I didn't look at him aggressively, mind you, just normal eye contact, and how any sane person could be provoked by like a 2 or 3 second eye contact is a bit beyond me. Anyway, I still don't know exactly what that was all about, but I do know that it seemed like something sinister was going on. And my hunch is that maybe he was trying to kidnap me. So my grandma, she actually ran into Ted Bundy when she was just a teen. My grandma grew up in Utah next to the Utah State University, or USU, and I don't know everything about the encounter because my sister has retold the story from my grandma, but here's what happened. So when my grandma was growing up, she's around 66 now, her parents were fairly religious, but not very strict when compared to most parents nowadays. She has always loved the outdoors and would often stay out all day outside of school, returning home after the sun was mostly down. And one night, she was at the park and it had started to get dark and was fairly cloudy. She was a little bit late to start heading home, but she had just gotten a little bit distracted, I think, and she was maybe about 16 to 18-ish at the time. A man had been watching her from his car for a while, but she didn't think anything of it. He called her over and asked if she wanted a ride home, but she had an uneasy feeling about this guy, so politely declined. He was trying to persuade her into just getting into the car. She was very uncomfortable and she was all alone. She was going to get into the car too, but then she noticed that the indoor handle to the passenger side door was missing. That was when she really got scared. She said that she had to go and her parents were probably worried. She quickly ran home and the incident just always bugged her. She stopped staying out past sunset and always came home an hour before it got dark after that. She never went to parks or playgrounds alone again, and it was a few years later that she heard about him, and she was horrified. Her whole life could have been changed if she had actually gotten into that car. I never knew this growing up. Whenever I would stay at my grandma's, we would go to the park nearby, but she always insisted that we come back an hour before the sunset. I always thought that she was just weird for it, but only recently I truly understood why. Even now, at her old age, she still can't go to the parks or playgrounds alone, and she has to keep her eyes on the kids at all times. I've always been obsessed with true crime and all that, but I never actually knew that my grandma, very well, could have been another statistic. To give you some context, in 2021, I got my first job as an order picker in a food processing company. Being a very unsocial person, I managed to negotiate with my boss to work with the small night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It's quite ridiculous too, because there's really nothing good about being an order picker when you compare it with other jobs. But for me, it was honestly heaven. I could work on my own without having to interact with other people, and that was just fine by me. One evening, my father dropped me off in front of the company at 9 p.m. and left. He couldn't take me any later because he was too tired to drive any later that night. So I sit down on the ground next to the building and start lighting up a cigarette and hanging out on my phone. A few minutes later, a man emerges from the darkness, well-dressed and well-groomed, and carrying a rucksack. He walks over to sit on the ground next to me. At the time, I thought that he looked like an ordinary employee, so I thought that he must have forgotten a file or come back to get it. But the strange thing was that the building was still open, so the man could have gone straight in to get his papers if he wanted. When I remembered that, I was a bit scared and wondered what this man wanted and why he was sitting so close to me. Being paranoid by nature, I imagined all sorts of creepy things that he could do to attack me. Fortunately, he didn't do anything like that. He just sat there and didn't move an inch. In fact, it almost seemed as if he had become a statue. I mean, this guy was completely still, not moving an inch or even blinking. After several minutes of silence, during which I stressed and he did literally nothing, it was 9:50 p.m., so I entered the building and the man did the same. I was even more worried now, but then I remembered that the building had security cameras. That reassured me a bit. I mean, after all, why would he attack me in the building which is secured by cameras when outside there were none? I made my way to the changing rooms to change into my prep outfit and saw that he had taken a different one that led to the offices. This reassured me a bit again, as if it confirmed my theory that he was just an employee. Throughout my evening work, I thought about this man and couldn't stop wondering why he had waited on the floor with me. One of the most likely scenarios I thought of was that he probably thought that the door was closed and that I was waiting to be let in, and that by instinct he just sat down and waited with me without saying anything. For most of my shift, I was alone in my area and continued to work, except that at one point I heard a man coughing, and turning around I saw him. And the man stood there, straight as an arrow, staring at me. When I noticed that he was staring at me, I jumped up and asked, "Can I help you?" But the man said nothing and continued to stare at me blankly. After about 2 minutes, which seemed like hours, he finally walked towards me. My instincts were screaming at me to run from this guy, but I couldn't. I was stunned, and he was less than 2 meters away. He put his hand in his pocket. At this point, I honestly thought that he was going to pull out a knife or something to stab me with, but instead he pulled out a pack of cigarettes, still intact, handed them to me, and just walked out. It was the same brand as the one that I had been smoking, but it didn't belong to me, for the simple reason that I'd buy my cigarette packs individually, and once this one is empty, I go and buy another, but I never buy several packs at the same time. What's more, he could never have known what brand it was, since I didn't take my pack out in front of him. After that, I never did see him again. I moved to another area that evening to talk to other colleagues, but they were dubious about my story. I also tried to tell my superiors, but they didn't believe me either, because you need an access card to enter the building in the first place, and according to them, if this stranger was able to get in, he probably had one. The problem was that I was the one who opened the door, and the man simply walked through before it was closed. Nevertheless, I continued to work there until the end of my contract, but I still don't know who this man is or what he wanted from me. Why did he sit so still next to me that night? Why did he follow me into an employee area? Why did he watch me for so long without saying a word? Why did he give me that unopened pack of cigarettes? And why did he just get up and leave like that? It's all really confusing, but I don't know. Something tells me that there just wasn't something right about that situation. This happened 3 weeks ago, and I've thought about it often, and I know now without a doubt that me and my patient were almost prey to a predator. I work for my state. I work with people with substance abuse disorder, the mentally ill, and to a lesser degree, those with slight developmental delays. My role with the developmentally delayed is similar to a lower-ranked social worker, I guess. One thing that I have to verify is that the participant is able to achieve their own personal goals set for their year, similar to an IEP in public schools. One of my patients has a goal to walk and or hike at least 1 mile 3 times a week. When I made my visit to her home, walking or hiking was what I needed her to achieve. So she took us both on a walking and slight hike sort of trail nearby. Her and I are actually similar age, our 40s. As we're walking the trail, we got to a point that was much more isolated. We were no longer walking the trail that loops around a neighborhood pond with many people, but we were on a trail that took us through the woods and a cotton field. Her and I were walking and talking when she suddenly stopped walking, and I looked at her, and just as she went to say, "I have a bad feeling," I also had an overwhelming feeling myself that someone or something was watching us. Due to her developmental delays, I felt more concerned for her welfare than my own, I guess. It's hard to explain, but I didn't really feel fear, I guess. I felt a feeling of protecting her. I looked behind us because I heard the sound of leaves crunching, and sure enough, a guy, who looked to be in his mid-30s, is suddenly coming out of the woods, and he's slowly creeping toward us. There was nobody else around, so for this guy to magically come out of the woods and creep up on us like that, I knew that whatever he wanted was nefarious. I told her to continue walking, giving her a head start. I really don't know why I even did this, but I just completely turned myself around, stopped, and looked straight at him. I just stared. I didn't say anything. He didn't say anything, but as soon as we locked eyes, it was as if he realized, now they know that I'm back here, because he froze and stopped walking toward us. I kept staring at him, and then I started to walk back towards my patient, so that he understood that my eyes were on him. Then as I walked backwards, I looked over to see my patient, looked back at him, and he honestly just disappeared as fast as he came, straight back into the woods. Now, if he was just wanting to walk this nature trail, why did he stop as soon as I turned around and stare like that? Why wouldn't he just continue on his walk and pass us? This guy was clearly waiting and watching for a woman, or perhaps women, to go down the isolated trail. For him to come out of the woods when he did, it was clear to me that he was out of hiding and stalking now. I will forever be convinced that my patient's bad feeling and my feeling of being watched saved one, or perhaps both of us from whatever that man had planned. I had a memory resurface recently, which I had to double check with my mum for reassurance. and she confirmed that it is unfortunately true. It was triggered by someone on the street outside of my job, peeking inside through a very small window. They were harmless, but the sight of their face suddenly reminded me of a memory that I had long forgotten from the first house that I lived in as a kid. We moved out of this house when I was 6 years old. A fence was built around the time that I was old enough to start walking, but my parents were still always weary of letting me outside until we moved away. I used to resent it, but now I think I understand why. Apparently, we had a neighbor a few doors down who was a registered sex offender. He had been required to notify his neighbors via his social worker when he moved in. He had a habit of doing odd, off-putting things around the neighborhood. Like, for instance, he once sprinted across the street and left a human-sized dent in our neighbor's garage door. He had also walked into another neighbor's back door, trembling, and asked to be held by her. She kicked him out and called the police when she discovered that he also had an erection. I found a lot of this out through researching his name after my mum confirmed my story. I also found his Facebook page, which included a photo of him and sealed any doubt in my mind that I had imagined it. His face was clear as day, the man that I remember. The sight of him, even through a screen, immediately made me nauseous. My memory tells me that I was sitting in our living room watching TV when I just felt like something was watching me. It was the middle of the day, and I turned to look out our front windows to see a man with his face and hands pressed against the glass. That same man that I saw on the Facebook page. He was smiling at me with huge eyes and an even more alarming huge grin. I remember being scooped up in somebody's arms and carried away into another room, and my mum confirmed that this would have been my grandma, who was babysitting me at that time. I think back on this, and I'll never forget that face, and I'm really glad that we moved. This is a story about my mum's house. Her and my stepfather, we'll call him P, have been married for almost 15 years. P is the 5th generation in his family to live on this inherited 150-acre property in a small rural town. He inherited a farmhouse that was so old that it was deemed unlivable, so they tore it down, buried most of it, and put a modular home on the property. Before P married my mum, he lived in the old farmhouse with his ex-wife. Her name was B. B thought the property and the house were extremely haunted, and P didn't disagree. They decided to bring a psychic to do an investigation, and she said that there were very many spirits, but that they were all good. Now, shortly after this visit, at around 3 a.m., P is awakened by a light turning on outside of his bedroom window. Living in the middle of nowhere, there was really no reason for a light to turn on like that. He looked out the window and apparently saw a little girl standing there. B woke up and looked out the window and saw her too, but then they started to smell smoke. They went downstairs to see that the kitchen had actually caught on fire. Everything in that kitchen burned, except for these Christmas wax figures of Mary, Jesus, and Joseph. P still has them in a shadow box placed in the kitchen that he has now, but they are lucky that they didn't lose the entire house. Anyway, fast forward to a long time later, my mum and P get married and are living happily ever after, and I'm living under the same roof in my early teens. Honestly, I really loved living there too. There was so much property to explore, but I remember this one part in the woods just always gave me the creeps and made me feel overwhelmingly uncomfortable with just so many bad vibes. So one night, I fall asleep and I remember having a really weird dream. In my dream, it was very clear in the morning, the crack of dawn. I get up and go out my back door and remember the sky being dark still, a dark bluish grey, and the air felt refreshingly cool on my skin. A little girl who couldn't have been older than 7 walks from the woods up to the yard and onto the back deck. She had very pale skin, light blonde hair and light-colored clothing. She looks at me, though, and smiles. I think to myself about how sweet, warm, and friendly she seemed. She doesn't say anything, but she holds her hand out and gestures for me to come with her, so I take her hand. We walk and walk and walk for what feels like forever. Along the way, we pass many other people, but they aren't bothering anybody, they're just sort of there observing us. The little girl led me to the spot in the woods that had always made me uncomfortable. When suddenly, the weather turns from summer to winter, from morning to evening, and it was freezing. I am amazed by just how beautiful the scenery suddenly is, but then I realized that the little girl wasn't holding my hand anymore. I look around and I see her body laying dull, limp, and lifeless in the shallow creek. Her skin had turned blue and she was curled up like a ball. I had screamed and cried for help at the top of my lungs, but nobody heard me and nobody came. I then woke up and the dream really bothered me and it freaked my parents out pretty bad too. I decided that I needed to do some research, and I found out that about 50 years prior, a young girl, 1.5 miles down the road, disappeared, but nobody knew where she went. I asked P, since he lived on this road his entire life, and yeah, he confirmed it. So, I never really had the stranger danger talk with my parents. We lived in a small town where I liked and trusted everyone. Starting at age 6, I was taught to commute by public transportation alone or with my younger brother. I never thought that an adult would harm a child, to be honest. Except my grandma, for some reason. To be young and to be absolutely dumb like that, right? Well, when I was 11, I was walking alone at the beach when a middle-aged man approached me and asked to take a photo of me. I smiled and he snapped a photo with his digital camera. He then asked me to take my shirt off, saying that we were at the beach and I would look better in the photo without it. At the time, I actually thought that it was an appropriate thing to ask, and I obliged and smiled again for a photo. I didn't feel uncomfortable or scared, but he tried to make conversation and asked what I like to do. I told him that I like to play video games. He told me that he has a PlayStation in his room and he invited me over to play video games. Now, if the sun wasn't almost down, to be honest, I probably would have said yes. Instead, I said that I have to go back to my family's house because it was getting late. He held my shoulder, urging me to come with him. I told him again that I couldn't go with him, and he hugged me and said goodbye. I thought that this was just a really weird encounter for years. The hugging part, that is, and not everything else, because I was just never really a physical touch kind of person and really liked my personal space. But in the end, I just sort of shrugged it off and never spoke about it to anyone. Years later, though, in my own deep shower thoughts, I realized all of a sudden just how messed up that really was. So, a series of events started to happen to me when I was very young, around 8 or 9. I admit that there is a chance that the series are not connected, but my feeling is that they all very well are connected to one disturbed man. The first event was the phone started ringing almost every night between 2 and 2:30 in the morning. Being a light sleeper, it woke me up constantly. My parents didn't ever appear to be bothered by it, probably because they both were drunk almost every night and passed out anyway. But even when I did complain, they would just respond by saying that it was probably the wrong number or something along those lines. It gave me a bad feeling, though, every night, hearing that loud rattling landline phone ringing in the kitchen. So one night, out of curiosity and frustration, when that phone rang, I decided to answer it. I heard some distant music in the background and also heavy breathing. Now, being older, I can say that it honestly sounded like somebody was sitting in a bar, maybe. Eventually, my parents changed the number, but a few months after my parents changed it, I was awakened again, but by a different sound. There is something creepy about hearing noises at night in an isolated country house. Every little sound can be heard, every sound sort of lingers, and you can feel it. So when I heard that car slowing down on the road in front of our house, it woke me with a really unsettling feeling. I remember that I could hear how the tires drove over the gravel in the driveway. My heart sank. I looked up at the wooden square clock in my bedroom. It was 2:15 in the morning. For reasons that I cannot explain, I crawled out of my bed and walked out to the living room and glanced out the windows that hung above the driveway. I kept my distance from the window so that he couldn't see me if he was there, and I stared down at him through the sheer curtains. A man in a dark-colored Buick Sentry sat in a car facing my house. I couldn't make out distinctive facial features. I could see that he had light-colored hair with a bowl-cut style. If I had to guess now, I would say that he was perhaps in his early to mid-30s. And he just sat there. He stared at my house in a sort of trance-like state. I really don't even remember him moving much. I waited to see what he was going to do. I was filled with fear. Around 15 minutes, he just sat there. Then he very slowly backs up and just drives away. He kept his eyes on the house as he drove away, though, and I'll never forget that. So, maybe it was the wrong house, or maybe he was just drunk. Who knows? But then I think that he actually visited again. It was a Sunday evening, and I was in the front yard playing with my siblings. I still remember that dreaded feeling of having to return to school the next day. A car pulls up at some point, and it stops in front of the mailbox down on the road. Our house was on a little hill with a back road in front of it. The mailbox was down on the road, and we stopped playing and watched down in curiosity. We knew that it was a Sunday, and the mail doesn't come anyway. Also, that is not the regular mailman's car, too. The man continued to sit there staring up at us, though. At one point, he reached his arm out of the window and acted like he put something in the mailbox, then drove about 50 yards up the road and just stopped and sat there. So my siblings told me to go and check the mailbox. I don't know why they told me to, maybe because I was the youngest, but I walked down the little hill and opened the mailbox, and nothing was in it. But suddenly, I hear tires screeching and the car was flying towards me in reverse. I screamed and we all ran into the house, and whoever they were, they drove off really fast. We told our parents, and they thought that we were confused and minimized the situation. That night, though, while laying in bed, it sort of clicked in my head that that man was the same man that came that one night. It was the same car, and I remember the blonde hairstyle. It was then that an unsettling feeling began to sink in. About a year after that, one day in school, I heard teachers telling kids to avoid a dark-colored Buick. They said that a man was trying to kidnap kids at their mailbox after getting off the bus, apparently. Thankfully, I moved out of that town a few years later when my parents got divorced. But every now and then, he haunts me in my dreams a bit. I never did hear anything about this man ever again. I don't know if any kids went missing or anything, and I really do hope that that was not the case. When I was 10, me and my family moved into this house. The first night that we were there was a constant tapping on the walls in one of the back bedrooms. My mum put it down to the pipes because it was an old house, but it sounded nothing like that, so I think she was trying to help us not to be scared. I lived there for 8 years, and in that time the house always felt off. There would be nights where I would be in bed and hear the downstairs door open and footsteps on the stairs with nobody ever reaching the top. One time I heard the door open, so I pretended to be asleep because I had school the next day and I was way over my bedtime. I waited for a few minutes and Thought that it was strange that my parent hadn't reached the top stair, so I got out of bed to check, and I looked down the stairs, but there was no one. Not only that though, but the front room door was still closed, and I could hear the TV on and my parents talking. I don't know how I managed to go back to bed that night after that, but somehow I did. The next time something happened after that though, it was late one night, around 2 or 3 in the morning I think. I was in bed reading this book I had got from the school library, and I turned over onto my side so that I could face the hallway, and I saw something out of the corner of my eye that made me look up. It came from my brother's room, and it was a dark figure, almost shadow-like. It had the rough outline of a human, but was slightly more rough to look at. It moved across the landing into my mum's room. I remember the hairs on the back of my neck standing up as I watched it disappear. I was terrified, so scared I couldn't move to investigate, so I told myself that it was late and that my eyes were tired and that there was really nothing there. I managed to turn and face the wall, and eventually I fell asleep. I don't know if it moved into my room afterward, but I was just too scared to look at it. In any case, I tried to put it out of my head after that, didn't really tell anyone about it. It was a few months later. I was downstairs with my mum. We had a living room that went into the kitchen, and to the right side was a bathroom. My mum was in there sorting her hair out after a bath. The mirror she was looking into reflected the kitchen and the doorway of the bathroom. And she asked, "Did you see that? That black figure that passed the mirror?" I was a little shocked by that, and she explained that it moved fast and she barely caught it, but described it as the same as the thing that I had seen upstairs. But I knew that I hadn't mentioned it to her, so how could she possibly have known? Anyway, a few months after that, I was old enough to look after my siblings at night. Everybody was in bed, and my sister woke me up saying that she heard footsteps up the stairs and she was scared. I managed to calm her down, but I know that I heard the same months before. Now, the layout of upstairs is that you would walk up the stairs, then turn, and there would be 3 more that would go into a landing that was a square. Then if you walked forward, there would be a bedroom and also one on each side. The house next to us, it mirrored this, so the window on the stairs you could see into next door's landing and the top stairs and vice versa. It was Boxing Day at this point, and I was downtown with my family when my friend from next door rang. She asked if I was home, which I responded that nobody was. She then proceeded to tell me that she stood by the window upstairs looking through to my room, and she could see a shadow just sat there on the floor with their back to her. I also hadn't mentioned anything to her, but she described the same thing that I had seen, the same way as well. Then, just before we set to move out, my mum hand-cleaned out this closet that she had in her room. She had cleaned it out many times before, but this time she found this random drawing of ballerina dancers, and on the back of it, it said "For Patricia, 1959. That was really weird because, like I said, she had cleaned it top to bottom many times, and just randomly this drawing was just sitting there, like it just popped into existence. To this day, I still don't know what was in that house, but I am convinced that there was something. So this happened to me in high school. I want to say like 2014 to 2016 sometime. I do think about it very often, and I've also told the story a few times to others. And every time that I do, I'm still left really uneasy. So, to preface this, I have had people close to me die tragically, my great uncle specifically, right before this happened, and I also had 2 other encounters around that same time. Now, I'm not too heavy of a sleeper, but I did smoke some green back in the day, if you know what I mean, and a good bit of it too. I was living with my grandparents. They slept across the hall. I had my own room. All I can remember is I always slept on the side of my bed closest to the bedroom door. And one night, I was awoken somehow in the middle of the night. It felt almost like a dream, but I remember just glancing up hardly and seeing a figure just standing there. In my absent-minded state, I thought that this was my younger sister, who lived up the street at my mother's house, mind you. I didn't hear anything speak, at least I don't think I did, but just a nudge of my arm a couple of times. I instinctively just scooted my body over to the other side of the bed to make room for my sister. Only, as soon as I did that, my eyes shot open in terror as I realized the feeling of someone laying next to me was not my sister, and couldn't be anyone else. I turned over, looked, and the blankets were moved, but there was nobody there. I will never forget that feeling of just pure terror that I felt in that moment. So before I start this, I would like to say that I have mentioned to my husband the possibility of carbon monoxide leaks, but he has told me that we do have a detector and batteries are good. He also said that we really have no gas lines running to our home. We have nothing that uses gas like our generator that is running or has been running months. Our garage has been a storage room basically, no running cars in there. We did go through the whole possible mold thing less than 6 months ago because we wanted to rule out the constant cold, crummy feeling my child and I were having. My spouse is an electrician and has to make sure all the buildings are up to code, so monoxide detectors are typically mandatory and have to be checked for function every so often. And anyway, all I'm getting at is that we have genuinely tried to think of every possibility for what this was. And so, this is what happened. A little while back, my husband came home from work for the day, earlier than usual, but today was a training day, so I didn't think much of it. There was nothing at all unusual about how we interacted. He says hello, comes over and gives me a kiss, asks about my day. I ask about his, and then he goes to the bathroom to change, etc. Then he went to start playing the new Diablo game that's just come out. I went to a different room and was scrolling social media for a while and noticed how quiet it was, so I called for him. There was no answer. I say it another time and no response. I think, maybe he fell asleep in his beanbag or something. So I go to check on him and he's not there. The TV is off. Weird. He usually tells me that he's going to work in the garage or out in the yard if he goes there. He's not out back, not in any of the rooms, not in the garage, not in the front yard. I couldn't find him anywhere. I notice when I look out the front that his work van is gone too. And now I'm really confused. Did he really just leave the house without giving me a kiss? And never in all these years has that happened. I instantly call his phone and it goes to voicemail. He texts right back and asks if I'm okay, and am I okay? Where did you go? I say. He messages and says that he can't talk at the moment because he's still in CPR training. I ask him why he didn't say goodbye, and then he asks me what I'm talking about because he kissed me this morning when he left. He told me that he hasn't left work for the day yet. Okay, so now I'm sort of losing my mind about this. I'm like, I just had a whole conversation with you. A hug. You went to pee? What do you mean you haven't been home? So he says I have to be confused or something because it definitely wasn't him. And no one set off his ring alert. Now, I'm 43 and I have never hallucinated in my life ever. My husband and I have been friends together for over 7 years, and it's not in his nature to do something like this as a prank, especially because we used to have a problem with a spirit of some sort when we moved into our home. We named him Loki because at first it was just a little funny mischief. Then it became more obvious that there was an entity of some sort causing things to happen in the house. It did progress to me being touched in my sleep at one point. Minor at first and then more aggressive, like yanking on my foot. I had gotten so scared that I was looking at local paranormal groups to help with getting rid of this thing. My husband sort of shrugged off the touching part. He thought imagination or dream, etc. Until it grabbed and yanked his foot out from the covers, and then he absolutely flipped. We were scheduled for a complete home renovation last February as part of a TV show. After the renovations and before the reveal, the station had a chaplain come and bless our home for us. We hadn't mentioned Loki to them, but after we moved back home, we never had an encounter with Loki again. Almost missed the beginning stage spirit, but we have been very thankful that we've had no issues for the last maybe 15 months. But this was something else. Have you ever heard of a person, a friend, or a family being impersonated like that? If so, why would they do that? It was like a whole clone of my husband. I feel like I'm going mad, and quite honestly, I'm just a bit at a loss here. So this happened on Saturday. I, a 29-year-old female, live in a decent neighborhood. Not the best, but definitely not usually thought of as super dangerous or anything. It wasn't even that late, to be honest, like 9:30 p.m., and it's summer in my country, so it's been dark for an hour or two at most. I had left my friend taking transport back home, and since my friend had left in a rush, there was something that I wanted to tell her that I felt that I would forget once I was home. But I got my phone taken from my hands a few months ago, so I was waiting until I was in a safe place to take it out. So I turn a corner. There's literally one block to my house, and this is a pretty small street, mind you. I thought that I was safe, and suddenly someone talks to me. His words were slurred, so I didn't quite get what he said. It was dark too, but after a moment, I understood that he was telling me to give him my phone, or my wallet or something. I stared, and despite the darkness, I saw something in his hand which he was holding very much like a gun. I think it may have been fake, but still, it terrified me. For some reason, I looked around, and not so far away, walking towards me, was another woman. I screamed for help and ran away from the man, all the while bracing myself for the pain in case the gun wasn't fake. And then the woman yelled at me to stop running and to go inside of the building closest to us, and we did. There, after having a panic attack, the woman told me that the man had been next to a car that I didn't see because I was so fixated on the possible gun. Now, I doubt that the man wanted anything other than my phone, but still, the fact that he had a quick and easy escape and that there is a possibility that I could have lost more than just my cell phone, that scares me. I honestly thank God for that woman that day, because without her, I don't know what would have happened. So my childhood best friend, Mary, and I were around 11 or 12 years old at the time. Mary's family had their own campsite in a provincial park, about 2 hours from our own hometown, and would spend the entire summer each year living in their camper out there. This particular summer, I was able to go and stay with them for a week, and we were pretty excited to spend our time adventuring throughout the forest. On the last night that I was there, we decided that we wanted to hurry down to the ice cream shop by the lake before it closed. It was early evening at this point, still pretty bright out, but beginning to lose light. The path that we took was down a short slope right next to the main road, with maybe 10 feet of thick brush and trees in between. On the other side was the forest, and with more tall, thick brush. So we were walking along. Well, we didn't see a single other person on the path in front or behind us, but we hear a sudden rustling and snapping of branches, similar to the sound of maybe a deer moving through the woods. Quite honestly, I wouldn't have thought anything of it, but then the sound of running footsteps follows. Mary glances back and suddenly grabs my arm, urging me under her breath not to look back. At the same time, the running stops. I don't know why I didn't ignore her and get a good look myself, but I guess I could sense the very real fear in her voice, and I chose to listen. We both start to panic though, getting that feeling like when you're running up the stairs after turning the basement light off. We pick up speed as much as we can without breaking into a sprint, knowing that the ice cream shop is only about a minute walk away at this point. The path soon breaks and we're in the parking lot. Suddenly, Mary steers me hard to the left, heading towards the lake and the boat rental instead of continuing straight to the ice cream shop, and I go along with it silently, understanding ice cream is no longer an interest right now. Mary is clearly panicking at this point. We're both looking around, but it seems like whatever scared her is nowhere in sight at this point. Mary walks up to the boat rental and gets us a kayak, and we climb in and begin to paddle out into the middle of the lake. As we paddle, she tells me that apparently there was a man behind us, and that the man had stopped running at us very abruptly upon making eye contact with her. He had been wearing a long black coat with the hood up, despite it being the middle of July, had a terrible smirk on his face, and she swore that as he stopped running, she saw him put something shiny away in his coat. He appeared to have just emerged out of the bushes after we walked past. Given the sounds that we heard right before he came running on the path too, I am pretty sure that she was telling the truth. We reach the center of the lake though and stop paddling. I pull out my Nokia brick phone that my parents had, thank God, given me, just in case, and I hand it to Mary and tell her to call her parents to come and pick us up. As the phone rings, I see her look out past me to the shore and go pale, then lifting a hand to point out what she was seeing. I turn and there was the man, stalking his way around the path that circled the edge of the lake, staring out at us. We sat in the middle of the lake and watched him do 2 full laps, never looking away from us, before finally disappearing. It took a few tries to get a hold of her family. We were just freaking out so bad the whole time, as the sun got lower and lower as well. But eventually we did manage to have someone come with the truck, but by that time we reached the shore, it was pretty dark outside. And to be honest, I really don't know what we would have done if we hadn't have been able to call for a ride that day. Looking back, I don't know why we didn't just go to the ice cream shop in the end, inform an adult there and ask her parents to come and get us. But whatever the case, it worked out for the best in the end and we got back safe. And thankfully, we never saw that man again. So about 12 years ago, I was 9 years old and I was home alone with my 12-year-old brother. We were supposed to go to my aunt's house to have lunch and wait for my mother there. We always did that because we were too young to stay home alone, according to my mum. So we got up at 10:30 a.m. I took a shower and my brother. After that, we were both in the bathroom brushing our teeth and finishing up, when we heard someone knocking on our door. Since every time someone knocked at our door, they turned out to be a salesman or probably a Jehovah's Witness, we kind of waited for them to just go away. And after a couple of minutes, I went to see if they were still outside through the window, but nobody was there, which was a huge relief for us. We continued getting ready when we saw a shadow go by through the bathroom window, which was kind of like a small square made with that kind of glass that makes everything behind it really blurry. We waited and saw in case it was just a bird flying by, but then a hand hit it, clear as day. We got scared. We really didn't know what to do. My brother had his cell phone, so he immediately called the police though. And while it was ringing, we heard a loud bang at the door. Someone was brute forcing it. I don't know if they were kicking it or ramming it or what, but it was one of the most frightening things that I had ever heard. My brother told me to lock the bathroom door, so I did. It took 5 bangs before the perpetrator finally bashed open the door. Then the police answered, and I remember the exact thing my brother said. He was whispering. His voice could barely be heard, but he said, "Hello, there's someone in our house, and I think they're stealing." Then there was a pause. "We're at," and he gave our address. There was another pause. "I'm with my little brother locked in our bathroom. Please hurry." While all that was happening, I was sitting against the wall hugging my knees, and it was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences ever. I could hear this man going through all of our stuff, emptying stands, going up and down the stairs, opening cabinets. He even broke a few cups and plates. don't know why. Then I heard the sound my cell phone does when it turns off, and I remembered leaving it on the kitchen table. I felt so stupid for leaving it there, to be honest, but things continued for a couple of minutes when we heard him trying to open the door to the bathroom. My brother got a hold of a big metal rod that we had lying around there. He started kicking the door. "Who's there?" the man screamed, and we didn't say anything. There was another kick, then another one. I felt like I was about to have an anxiety attack. My chest started to ache, and I had chills and was really hot. I tried to remain calm, but it was just too much. After that, though, he stopped. We heard the door opening, and then there was silence. We waited for almost 10 minutes before going out of the bathroom, and the living room was just a total mess. Lots of papers and books on the floor. The cabinets were open, cups and plates on the floor. In our mother's bedroom, the nightstand and the closet were open, and everything inside them was all over the place. Upstairs in our room, it was the same thing. In about 5 minutes, the man was able to go through everything that we had and left a total mess. After that, my brother called my mum, and she ordered us to go to my aunt's ASAP, so we did. When we got there, I was a little bit more relaxed. My aunt was waiting for us with ice cream, probably because my mum told her everything and she wanted to calm us down a bit. We went back home at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and my mum told her boss that she had a home emergency, so she left early. She tidied up the house, cleaned up, and left everything the way that it was before so that we could relax. I really appreciated her effort, and my aunt's too, to calm us down and do everything so that we didn't have to think about it. According to my mum, the police got home after she arrived at 3 o'clock, 4 hours after the incident, mind you. She explained everything, but because of a lack of evidence, nothing could really be done. The man was never caught, and honestly, I don't even think they even tried to search for him. The next few days, though, my mum was home with us, and yeah, I tell the story these days as a bit of a funny anecdote, I guess. Luckily, no one was hurt, and he only took useless stuff in the end, but at the time, I was really scared. To be a 9-year-old and have an experience like that can have really serious repercussions. I'm lucky it never came to that, and I got over that after a couple of weeks, but yeah, it's something that I'll never forget, that much is for sure. This takes place back in early 2017. I had recently moved from a major city to a small town in the Midwest to get myself together and separate myself from bad habits that I had developed. Previously, I'd been living on the West Coast and worked for a couple who were pot farmers, just trimming their weed for one season with a few other trimmers. Nothing major stuck out to me other than the guy, mid-30s, was a total jerk and super protective of his weed. And his girlfriend was someone that I wouldn't normally get along with, but she was okay. In any case, I trimmed their weed that season and they paid me a portion up front. They, or he I should say, said the rest would come after he sold a few pounds of whatever, because that was just how the business went. They did end up paying me within a few weeks, so all was good with me in the end. However, the man here kept texting me after I moved mid-country with random, "Hey, how are you doing?" sort of thing. I never liked the guy, got bad vibes from the get-go, and his wife or girlfriend was a friend of a close friend, so I sort of gave them the benefit of the doubt, I guess. Anyway, the wife or girlfriend started messaging me via text nearing spring after I'd worked for them trimming weed that fall season, asking if I would be available to house sit for them while they were on vacation out of the country. At this point, I was living in Colorado and the farm was in California. I didn't have a permanent job set up yet, and they were offering good money to house sit, plus some extra money trimming weed that they had left over from the season. Stupidly, I drove my butt 17 hours with dollar signs in my eyes, and all the hell that was from there. I would like to share a lot of details, but the gist of it is that someone was at their house the entire time that I was house sitting. I'll try and set up the scenario for you as best as I can, but they have a full house with a gardener's quarters attached to their main house. there's a 1-bedroom and a bathroom, an electric stove, kettle or kitchen area in the gardener's bedroom. There's also a doorway from this area into the main house, blocked by a bookshelf on my side. When they invited me to stay and house sit, they were there for 2 to 3 days, and part of their stay included drilling the door shut on the opposite side so that I could not enter their house. To be honest, that did not bother me, and I honestly understood why they lock up their house like that, but things got really weird afterwards. So, I'd been there alone for a few days, just trimming weed, walking the dogs, filling the hummingbird feeders, watching the house like I was supposed to. Honestly, this house was out in the middle of nowhere anyway, so I don't even think anyone would have come there anyway. But the girlfriend or wife would call from Morocco every so often to check up on me. I thought that everything was fine, to be honest. Until I started to hear water running from the kitchen inside of the house. The part of the house that I had no access to, but was directly connected to. I immediately called the couple, or texted them, maybe, and told them that I could hear someone in their house. Their response was literally, "It's none of your concern what you hear on the other side of the wall." This really turned my stomach. I was in the middle of nowhere, locked by a gate on their property, hired to house sit, and all of a sudden it was not my concern if someone was inside of their house. It freaked me out, and I still had 2 more weeks to be at this place, without phone service too, and I was properly freaked out at this point. Over the next few days though, I would feel scared and calm in waves. At one point, I was sitting outside with the dogs and they all ran up to the side of the house wagging their tails like they were greeting someone, and I heard a very quiet shush and footsteps patter off. I continued to hear the TV, microwave, water running from the main part of the house. The language the girl or wife was using with me via text was too personal in regard to what I was doing. I mean, sure, they could have had a camera installed, although I scorched the room for any devices, but the sounds and even the dogs reacting to what I heard was enough for me. Once I realized that I was house-sitting, but also being spied on in some weird way, I started to have some fun with it. I don't know if I figured that I was going to die anyway, or that if maybe I acted crazy enough, they wouldn't want me for whatever their purposes were, but one night, I was out in the small porch, steps, having a very late cigarette. It had to be 11 to midnight, and I could hear someone walking around the perimeter of the house. So I stood up, opened the door to the gardener's quarters, and closed the door, as if I had walked back inside. But I just opened the door and closed it to give that impression, keeping my position with the cigarette on the porch, that is. Immediately, someone walked from the side of the house, because they thought that I went inside, noticed me, and then ran into the woods. In my mind, I set up a tiny trap to see if I was just delusional, and it proved that I wasn't. So I started doing crazy, dumb stuff because I was alone. Nothing too wild. I just blasted Backstreet Boys, set up their garage cans like a drum set, and walked around topless. Honestly, I thought that if these people were crazy enough to watch me while I house sat for them, I had to do something more ridiculous to push them away. Maybe that doesn't make sense to you, but I can't help but reference the Hey Arnold episode where a bully is after him and he says, "Don't hit me, I'll hit me, I'm crazy." Anyway, the couple finally came back to their house from Morocco and acted like they didn't want to pay me. They did after some pulling and tugging, but man, don't ever go house sit and not really know the people you're house sitting for in the Emerald Triangle like I did. Or just don't even go there at all, as it's genuinely a really shady business. So when I was in high school, my friends and I were into really spooky stuff that we honestly had no business messing around with. We would visit cemeteries at night, go to our small town's local haunt spots to try and stir up any urban legends. But the story that I'm about to tell made us pretty much quit cold turkey trying to seek out the paranormal. So one night, we were over at our friend's century-old home, and I mean, it was old and creaky and the perfect setting for a night of Ouija board. We brought it out, and for the first half hour, nothing insane happened. just some basic movement from the planchette. Then, feeling smug, I asked the spirits what my middle name was. The thing is, my middle name is literally made up by my parents. It's not a real name. No one in the circle knew, let alone could spell my middle name. There was literally no way that someone could even guess it. But somehow, the board knew. It spelt my middle name perfectly, and I could feel my heart fall into my gut at that point. Keep in mind, my hands were not on the planchette, so I couldn't have actually moved it myself either. Everyone laughed because what a silly middle name that would be, but I had to confess that it was mine. And the color drained from everybody's faces immediately. Then, all of a sudden, a glass ashtray that was sitting a few feet away on the coffee table split clean in two, and at that, we were done. We left the house to go stay somewhere else, and fortunately, I've never experienced anything that terrifying ever again. So I lived in a house where what I can only describe as unexplainable things occurred. It was a double, and I rented the bottom, and my sister and my newborn nephew, they lived in the unit on the top. Crazy and unexplained things just kept happening too. For example, one time I was knocking on my sister's door and no one would answer. The door was locked, and I figured that she was in the back bedroom and just couldn't hear me. So I knocked louder, and finally I could hear someone walking down the stairs to unlock the door to let me in. Only when I opened the door, there's nobody in there. I go upstairs and find my sister and nephew asleep. When I wake up my sister, she has no clue what I'm talking about and no clue who let me in, but she tells me that somehow her son keeps getting out of this very large crib without a scratch on him or even a bump or a sound. It was just completely impossible for a newborn to get out of his crib, but it happened again when I was babysitting. It still scares me to think about it because it was just impossible to escape a crib like this, and if he somehow could climb out, he would be hurt really badly too. I went to check on him, and he was sitting in the floor completely fine, just chilling like he wasn't alone. Stuff like this kept happening too, and then one day, somebody shows up while we're standing on the porch and they tell us their name and ask if their W-2s had been sent there. Apparently they were the previous tenants. We did find the mail that he was looking for too, proving that he was who he said that he was. He refused to step on the property though and told us that we need to be out of that house as soon as possible. He told us that his mum lost her mind from living in that house and will never be the same. After everything we'd experienced, how could we not believe him too? We were a month-to-month lease, and after that we got out as soon as we could. I like to think of myself as a rational and logical person, and just have never been able to explain to myself what the heck was going on in that house. So I've been debating about whether to share this or not, but I finally decided that it's been long enough for me to talk about this. It all happened to me and my mum a few months ago, back in October. It happened in a very rural part of New Hampshire, like a side road on a side road type of neighborhood. It was pouring out, as it had been raining for pretty much the whole day. My mum had just gotten back from down the street in my sister's car, and I was on the couch in the living room when suddenly I heard the doorbell ring. Our front door has a huge glass pane in the front, so we can look out from the inside, and someone can look in from the outside too. And through this window pane, I see a man. I didn't get a great look at him, as I didn't have my long-distance glasses on, but the man noticed that I had seen him and waved as if he was trying to be friendly. For the rest of this too, I'll refer to this guy as Poncho Man. So I got up and thought about opening the door for Poncho Man, but relented. As I couldn't properly see who it was, I didn't want to let a stranger in the house, obviously. So instead, I went down the hall to my parents' bedroom where my mum was getting ready for work. She asked what was up, and I explained to her that a man in a poncho was outside of our door, and wanted to talk to us. She went as white as a ghost. Immediately, she stopped getting ready, closed and locked the bedroom door, and started checking the windows to make sure that they were locked. I asked her what was going on, and my mum explained that she was driving home, she had seen the poncho man, and he'd been standing motionless on the side of the main road. And as soon as my mum turned down the road, he started to walk, presumably to follow her. She said that the encounter, while being weird, she didn't think too much of it. But why would someone be out there in the pouring rain, down a back road in the afternoon of all things? It was like he was waiting for something. Hearing this, I started to panic a bit as well. My mum called my aunt, the two are like best friends, and asked what she should do. My aunt told her to call the police immediately, and so we did. We proceeded to pace around the bedroom, frantically looking out the windows to see if we could see Poncho Man. From where the bedroom was angled, it was impossible to look at the front porch and see if he was still there, but we were desperate for anything. After what felt like hours, we finally saw a police car pull up. We carefully unlocked the door and went down to let the officer in. We explained what we saw, and he agreed to do a scan around the neighborhood. As he left, I noticed that there was something on the doorknob, though. I took it off, and it was a political ad for a candidate that was running for office. It's possible that Poncho Man was just campaigning for the candidate, but there are a lot of holes in that story. Like, it was pouring out, so why would you go door to door in pouring rain? And why would you go that route in such a rural neighborhood? The houses are so far apart that you could barely make a dent on foot. The time doesn't make sense either. I mean, sure, I and my mum were home, but it was about 4 in the afternoon. Most people would still be at work, so you'd probably get no response from knocking anyway. Eventually, too, the officer returned, and he had found the guy down the road and had questioned him. Poncho Man was able to ID himself, and he claimed that he was a political campaigner and was just knocking on doors for that reason. But when probed further, conveniently enough, Poncho Man couldn't provide any other door signs, as the one that he had left on our house was the last one apparently. That makes the campaign story even more absurd. I mean, our house is in the middle of the street. It's not like we were the last by any means, so why wouldn't you bring enough for the whole street? Even the officer pointed this out to us and said that it was definitely unusual behavior. Although the officer was suspicious of him, there wasn't really anything that he could do about it, as there was no way to prove intent. He told us, though, to be alert and not to hesitate to call if Poncho Man returns. Anyway, fast forward a few weeks, and I start noticing that a police car seems to be permanently stationed down the road from us, about a 3-minute drive. I got curious one day and asked my mum about it, and she said that there were multiple break-ins into the houses down the road apparently, and the police were doing a sort of sting operation. The Poncho Man encounter and the break-ins may be unrelated, but considering how Poncho Man acted, I have a sinking feeling that somehow they're all connected. Thankfully, for the past few months, we've heard and seen nothing of Poncho Man. We eventually got a new doorbell system with a camera, and the police left the area where they were doing the sting, and I hope that this whole situation is over and done with, and that I never have to meet Poncho Man ever again. This happened roughly 8 years ago now. I was hanging out with some friends for one of our friends' birthdays. We had gone out for a stroll to our local dock to wait for our weed guy. We were all 16 or 17. This is important too because we were not under the influence at this time. When we arrived at the dock, we hung out for a bit talking and waiting for our weed guy. My buddy gets a text from him saying to meet him in a different spot because he was held up at another place. The rest of my friends agreed to walk there, whereas I was an overweight kid and kind of lazy at the time. I didn't want to walk the 1.5 miles to pick up the smoke, and so I elected to stay at the docks because they planned on returning to smoke by the lake anyway. Fast forward about 10 minutes after they left, and I'm sitting on a bench looking out over the water when I look to the right, down the length of the lake, and see a white orb floating maybe 150 feet over the lake. I immediately got this, I don't know, gut feeling of being extremely uncomfortable looking at this white orb, and begun to walk back to where my friends were supposed to go. I made it to the train tracks that headed out of the dock area when I heard "hey" and my name. I turned around to see four figures that I couldn't quite make out, walking out behind one of the boats on the shore, waving. This was how many of my friends were with me before they left too. But anyway, the next thing that I know, I'm completely turned around from the direction that I was heading out of the dock area. I hear sounds coming from the fence line to my right, which is my friends yelling my name and asking where I was. Not to mention that between the time of seeing the figures walk out from behind the boat to hearing my friends, about 40 minutes had passed, and to this day, I don't know what happened to that time that I lost. I would love to hear your thoughts, and if you have any idea of what might have happened. Back in 2013, I just started an education journey, and after the first school period, I had to be out and find an internship to be able to progress. But at the time, it proved to be almost impossible to get one, so while I was looking, I decided to take another job just to make sure that we had food on the table. After searching for a while, I found out that a friend of my fiance's family had his own handicap bus company, a kind of taxi service for wheelchair users or otherwise disabled people. And he needed someone to cover the night shift since it was a bus that had to be on call at least 22 hours a day. And seeing that I'm quite the night owl, I immediately told him that I'd be happy to take the job, and after I got the needed license, I was hired. The job was pretty basic. I mean, pick people up and drop them off where they needed to go, and sometimes use a machine to get wheelchairs up or down from stairs, and when there was no trips, I drove to a designated area and did whatever I wanted while waiting. I quickly found a truck stop in the area too, where I could park and catch some Z's while waiting. There was a gas station where I could buy coffee in the early hours of the shift, and on the other side of the gas station's parking lot, on the opposite side of the truck stop, there was a rundown restaurant with a motel connected to it. To not disturb the sleeping truckers if I got a trip in the middle of the night, I usually parked on the restaurant side. So after parking there every night for a while, I noticed one particular room had a lot of people come and go in, and in the beginning I thought nothing of it. But then one night, in the end of the summer, while I was half asleep with the window slightly open, I suddenly heard yelling coming from the motel, and a dude came tumbling out of the room and started running. And a few seconds later, a big dude came running after him with something in his hand. I couldn't make out what it was, but I thought that it was none of my business and went back to my half-sleeping waiting stage. Not much time passed and my phone went off, and I had a trip an hour's drive away, so I turned on the bus and was leaving the parking lot when I saw the big guy coming around the corner. The rest of the night I had back-to-back trips, so I didn't park until I got home. The day after, I didn't get a return to home zone until 2 or 3 in the morning. When I arrived at the parking lot, the area where I used to park had fist-sized rocks strewn all over the place. Not connecting the dots at the time too, I just parked a few spots over and started waiting. I fell asleep pretty fast, but was jerked back into reality when a car light in front of my bus honked its horn. They also then flashed the high beams and revved its engine. I thought it was just some idiot who noticed me sleeping and found it funny trying to make me scared, so I jumped out of the bus about to tell him to get lost, but instead of driving off or stopping, the driver made the start brake thing with the car, indicating that I was the one who should get lost. And then, that was the moment that I connected the dots. Not wanting to seem like a pushover though, I stood still and stared at the car. Not that I could actually see anything with the high beams almost blinding me, and after what seemed like a really long time, but must not have been more than 30 seconds, the car drove off. After that, I decided to park near the trucks from then on in. So, a month or so passed and nothing had happened since the car episode, and I figured that nothing more would if I just kept parking by the trucks. But then one night, I had a long 12-hour shift on a Sunday, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., and I didn't have time to eat dinner before work that day, and during the first half of my shift, I had back-to-back trips with no time to eat, so when I got a return to home zone, I quickly parked in the far end of the almost empty truck stop and got ready to eat my now very late dinner that my fiancée had packed for me. I wanted to watch some TV on my phone and while eating, so I sat on my back against the driver's side door and got comfy, but while turning my back to the door, I had accidentally hit the door lock with my elbow. And that was my luck, because as I was sitting there scrolling Netflix on my phone, I suddenly felt the bus rock and heard the clack of the door handle behind me smack back in position. I quickly turned and saw a dude with a hood over his head, quickly crouching and proceeding to lay down on the ground crawling under the bus, with a huge kitchen knife in his right hand. I quickly got up and made sure the other two doors were locked, and then I looked in all directions to see if I could spot him. He was still under the bus, and I was sure as heck not jumping out this time, since the knife made his intentions pretty dang clear. Instead, I turned on the engine, turned on the spots on the back of the bus, and looked around to see if I'd scared him off, and luckily for me, it seemed that it did. I saw him run off and into a bushy or woody area at the end of the truck stop, and after that, I never parked at that truck stop ever again. I also always made sure that all the doors were locked every time that I was parked and trying to relax. So I went to the grocery store early one morning, and when I was checking out, there was an elderly gentleman in front of me. He was wearing a veteran's hat. He started making casual conversation with me about prices and how, when he was young like me, the prices were super low. He was much older, so people around him, the cashier and some other gentlemen, helped him bag his groceries and whatnot, and he didn't have much, but it was hard for him to keep his balance. He almost fell at one point, held onto my arm and apologized to me for doing so. I told him that it was okay and to have a great day. I also didn't have many things, so I began to walk out of the store, and eventually I caught up to him, as he couldn't walk very fast. So I asked him if he wanted me to walk him to his car, and he told me that he had rode his bike because he was forced to turn his driver's license due to his age. I was impressed that he had rode his bike and asked him where he lived. He told me he lived about 15 minutes away, on bike that is. I asked him if he wanted a ride. He was elderly and didn't seem like a threat at all, and he accepted. So I popped my trunk open so that he could put his bike in. We were struggling when another man who was about to walk into the store saw and helped us. He thanked the elderly man for his service and proceeded to go inside. Now, on the way, he asked if we could stop by Carl's Jr. to get a new combo his wife saw on TV and had asked him to bring her back one. He called his wife and asked her what the name of the combos was. Once we got to the drive-thru, we ordered and I offered to pay, and he thanked me again. On the way to his house, he asked me what I do for a living. I told him that I'm paralegal, and he asked for my number because he was trying to sue the state of California and a detective who was now retired. I gave him my number and then asked him about his potential case. He then proceeded to tell me that he had been in jail in the 70s for false rape allegations apparently, and that the detective working on the case really had it out for him. I was shocked, but working in the legal field, it's not that uncommon for me to see these types of situations. When we got to his house, his wife was waiting outside. She was also elderly, and she thanked me for giving her husband a ride and seemed excited to have someone there. I had gotten out of the car and to get his bike out of my trunk, so she asked me if she could show me their front yard, leading all the way up to their backyard. She said that her and her husband worked on their home for many years, and she seemed very proud of her home. I told them that I did have to leave, but that it was nice to meet them, and then she insisted. So in the end, I let them show me around, and when we got to the backyard, they opened the back sliding door and asked if I wanted to come in for some orange juice. I kindly declined, and I suddenly got a very weird feeling, but I brushed it off. They told me that I could come in and set my purse down if I wanted. My purse is a crossbody bag, so I hadn't even realized that I still had it on. Anyway, they insist for me to come in. Mind you, they're super elderly, so I did. They began to show me their wedding photos on the walls, and as we're walking through the home, the elderly man shows me all the doors, and the doors have all of these crazy type of contraptions, and he says, "Look, so nobody can break out." Now, mind you, he definitely said break out and not break in. And at this point, my gut was screaming at me to get out of there. He then said, "Come right this way. I want to show you how we converted this room." My fight or flight response kicked in at this point, and I don't know how I figured it out, but I was able to undo the contraptions from the front door and broke out of there. I ran to my car that was sitting in the driveway, and I drove away as fast as I could. I went the opposite direction from where my house was, but all I cared about was to get as far away as possible, fast. When I got home, I was shaken, and I got several phone calls from him and voicemails asking why I had left so sudden and if I was okay. I blocked his number and called my cousin to tell her what had happened. And to this day, I don't know, was I almost kidnapped? I mean, they were extremely old, but maybe somebody else was in the house. Maybe someone much younger and stronger. Or maybe the whole thing was just an act. I don't know, but something about the whole situation just didn't feel right. Also, they told me at the time that they didn't have any children, but when I did some research online, I found out that they do have a daughter and a granddaughter who happens to be a local news reporter here in town. And the fact that they lied about that really only adds to all of my suspicions. About 2 years ago, a group of my friends went out to a concert. We had a good time, plenty to drink, and the concert had ended and we were just outside trying to figure out a place to cure our drunchies. We were standing in a circle on the sidewalk, and our friend group consisted of 7 guys and 1 girl. Now, some random guy comes up and stands way too close to the girl in our group. We didn't know what he was doing, and it was really odd. All 7 of us guys just stared at him like, "What the heck are you doing?" He noticed us staring at him and silently left at that point. Our friend Lexi had a disgusted look on her face and told us that he was standing so close that she could feel his boner on her leg. As he gets further up the street, we see him approach another woman who ignores him and keeps going her way. He then turns around and starts coming back to where we were, and walks past us staring at our friend Lexi, and we tell him to keep it moving, creep. About 2 minutes later, we hear a woman screaming and our whole group sprinting towards the screams. He's fully on top of a woman, and there's a guy laying on the ground next to the woman screaming. My friend instantly jumps on his back and gets him in a headlock and starts pulling him off of the woman. I was fuming with anger and disgust and just started hitting on this guy in the face multiple times while my friend had him in a headlock. At this point, the guy is basically unconscious, so we stop and we leave him lying there on the concrete. The guy who was laying on the concrete next to the woman being assaulted then all of a sudden wakes up, apparently he'd been knocked out or something, and comes over and kicks this guy. And apparently the creeper came up to this guy and the woman and started trying to touch the woman, saying that he wants to, have his way with her. And while the guy and the woman were boyfriend and girlfriend, so obviously the guy wasn't about to have this. But they were out celebrating his birthday and he was super drunk and unable to defend himself. The creeper punched the guy in the face and instantly knocked him out, and had taken the woman to the ground and began assaulting her, which is when we showed up. Quite honestly, I'm just thankful that we were around at that point, and showed up quickly, as it could have been so much worse. I normally don't condone violence at all too, but sometimes it really is the only option. It was 1995. My family and I had moved into a new house in a fairly new suburb at the time. My parents thought of it as the perfect split-level house, spacious and family-friendly, even with an outdoor spa as well. They bought the house as second owners from a couple with 3 kids who were divorcing, and we were a pretty happy family. From the first day that we moved in, though, my parents complained about bees in a wall. They had a pest removalist come and exterminate the bees. Same night, my mum had a dream of a woman with long black hair looking like a gypsy with a red dress chasing her. She didn't think too much of it, obviously, as it was just a dream after all. I had a cousin come and stay with us from overseas a year later, and we recently found out that he told another family member after going back to his country about seeing a lady at ours, and it was the same description that he gave as my mum saw in her dream. After that, weird things started happening too. My dad had troubles as his close-knit brothers and a sister who came to our house with their families almost every weekend turned on him without warning. His personality gradually changed too as he became arrogant and angry. He died young and suddenly at home in 2001, which forced us all to move house. Our front pergola caved in, I was having issues at school, my brother was always sick, and the birds in our aviary were dying one by one all the time, even after my dad had just bought them as young ones. I had even seen a faint spectre of a woman from my dining room upon coming home from school by the front door. I stared at it until it disappeared through the front door as soon as my dad came home from work. But the last night in our home, my mum dreamt of the same woman again saying goodbye. The weirdest thing though was that at our new house, there were no issues. We heard from our old neighbours though that our next door neighbour's granddaughter unfortunately took her own life on their property. 6 degrees of separation, I eventually worked with a lady whose son married one of the 3 girls of the divorced couple who sold us that house. Her daughter-in-law's mother relayed information through her that confirmed my suspicions too. And I have since been doing some research via libraries and the local council for information as I'm still intrigued about this place to this day. So, it makes me question, what actually happened on that property or land before the house was built? Was there a murder that took place there, or even the gypsy woman's body buried underneath the house or something? Was the gypsy woman's intent to ruin people's happiness? Did my dad get possessed by something? And of course, how are the owners who bought from us going with their own experiences there? If I find out that information, I'll be sure to let you guys know. Last night at around 5 a.m, I was asleep and I heard a lot of the dogs in the neighborhood, including mine, barking. I tried to ignore them because, they do that sometimes. They bark for pretty much anything and everything. But a couple of seconds later, I think that I hear what sounds like people yelling, at least 2 different people. I'm obviously still half asleep, so at first I'm thinking that it's a bunch of teenagers just being rowdy and annoying. I used to do stuff like that too. But then I'm starting to understand what they're saying. It sounds more like they're arguing, and I'm starting to wake up at this. I grab my phone and I call the police. I'm on the phone with the dispatch and hear what sounds like a woman screaming bloody murder. I've never heard anyone scream in such agony before too. But then I hear a man's voice scream as well, and the dispatch tells me that other people have called the police, so they're on their way. It honestly sounds like the people are right in my yard, and my mum is awake at this point and comes to my room asking if I hear it too. We finally get the courage to look out the window. It's just one woman. She's standing right under the streetlight near our yard and screaming. At points, she makes her voice deeper and kind of sound like a man, but it's just her. Her hair is tangled and she's wearing only shorts and a tank top in January. The police pull up about 2 minutes later and they're trying to pat her down, but every time they go to pat her down, she grabs at her pockets. Eventually, they just arrest her, and I know she probably just wasn't well or all there or perhaps even high, but it was honestly scary to say the least. I've never seen someone acting like that, and I've never heard someone in such agony like that before too. I don't know what was wrong with her or what happened to her after that, but I just cannot stop thinking about it. The way that she sounded, both as a man and as a woman, just didn't make sense to me. So let this be known before I start. We were kids and we had no idea about the paranormal at this time. However, my siblings and I had a Ouija board in our house. We had saw this trick that if you went into a dark, small space with the Ouija board and a mirror, you could see the ghost that you were talking to, apparently. Now, us being kids, I must have been 8 at the time, and we were excited to try it. So my brother, 14, my sister 12, and my other sister 11, and me all rushed to my brother's closet with a small flower mirror that we had. At first, we were just asking silly questions, normal kid stuff. Like, where are you, who are you, what's your name, etc. Me being the youngest, I was completely sure my older siblings were pulling a prank on me. I took my hands off and proceeded to accuse them of moving the planchette. My siblings then suggested that we all ask a question and then take our hands off to see if it moved. Being dumb kids, we asked, who do you want to kill? Well, we all took our hands off and the planchette shot towards my brother. All of us, being extremely freaked out, ran to my dad to tell him, to which he then made us smash the board with a sledgehammer outside. It was a scary experience, and we definitely didn't touch the glass, and there's just no explanation for how it moved like that. I mean, we were in a closet. There was no wind, there was no slant in the closet, and there was just nothing that could have made it move like that. So, does anyone know what this experience could have been? Although I'm super interested in the paranormal, I do not know a lot of information about it. This whole thing, though, has haunted me since I was a kid, and I'm glad that I finally get to share it here, and I would love to hear what you guys think. In 2020, I met this guy at a mall that I worked at. He owned one of the stores at the mall, and it was a tech store to repair phones. But I would see him often because the office was close to his store, to be specific actually, right across from each other. And one day he came up to me and asked for my name, and we made small talk and we exchanged numbers. We started seeing each other until one night I was so tired from work that I didn't want to go to dinner with him anymore. I'm a single mum and I get burned out easily, so I told him that I didn't want to go anymore, and he said, "No, get ready, I already made the reservations." I said flat out that no, I wasn't going because I was exhausted, and I'm the type to refuse to be forced into doing anything, and being controlling is such a turn-off, so I was already getting ready to dump him. I said no firmly, and he responded saying that I'm on my way, and I said, well, I'm not going, so waste your gas if you want to. I didn't think that he would actually come, but of course, he did. He showed up at my apartment and was non-stop honking outside. He was calling and texting me non-stop while honking, and I threatened to call the cops, and he didn't stop. I called the cops for a noise complaint, and as soon as he heard the sirens, he sped off. Now, I remember waking up the next morning to 60 text messages and 100 missed calls saying that I can't believe you stood me up. I love you, and what is wrong with you? I just wanted to spend time with you. The list goes on, but it really made me see him in a different, weird, creepy light, because how do you love me if we've only been dating for like 2 months? We weren't in a relationship at all, at least in my eyes we weren't. Yes, we did get it on already after the first 2 weeks of seeing each other, but what scared me was I remember when after we had done that, he said that he was a virgin. I'm starting to believe that he actually was too, because of just how things started to escalate. But after he told me that, I didn't have intercourse with him again. So, out of the 2 months, we only had intercourse once. He's a Muslim and his parents are very strict, and they're very onto him about whether or not he would sneak out to see me all the time, even though he was 24 at that moment. But after that night of him honking, I broke it off with him and called him a psycho. I told him that I don't ever want to see him again. So now, we're obviously in 2023, and ever since 2020 to now, he goes through weird mental states where, in certain months, he'll blow up my phone, but he'll do it once out of like 6 months basically, just out of the blue, and I never respond. Until one day in October, he sent an apology saying, "I'm sorry, I've moved on. I know that I was acting crazy and blah blah blah," and that he wanted to be on good terms as friends, and asked if he can take me to dinner to make up for what he's done. I thought that he was being honest because I hadn't heard from him in months, and I said okay, so I went to dinner with him. But that was the biggest mistake of my life because before we got the food, he literally got on his knees and begged for me to never leave him again and that he was in love with me. I've never been so scared or freaked out in my life, and I just ate in silence to keep my cool and stood silent because I didn't know what he was capable of anymore and I didn't want him to, snap or something. Eventually, though, I said that I don't really feel good, so can I go home, and he drove me home. Once I got out of the car, I was so relieved and promised myself that I would never talk to him again, and I never did speak to him again. However, ever since October of 2022, he has been texting my phone once or twice a week asking to go to dinner, and I've never responded because he honestly just makes me sick to my stomach. I moved, thank God, so he doesn't know where I live, but recently he's been texting me to go to dinner again. The last text was December 30th, and the prior one was the week before that, and it's just been very consistent recently. But then, on Friday, January 6th, 2023, 2 days ago, he took a picture of me while I was working and sent me the picture saying, "That's you." It scared me a lot because how the heck did he know where I worked? I mean, I just switched to a different salon and he didn't know the salon prior that I worked at. At least, I don't think he knew. I've only been at this salon for 2 or 3 weeks, and it makes no sense, and my heart dropped when I saw the picture, and I responded, "You're stalking me, leave me alone." And he said that he is a limo service and was driving around when no way in heck he could have seen me through the window because my station is the second station. He must have zoomed in to take the picture. There's a desk where he took the photo, so it's definitely really weird and creepy. I called the police and they basically victim blamed me and said, how do I know the guy that I dated and his last name or his home address and all that? They said since I didn't know his last name or home address, I can't file a restraining order or order of protection. Honestly, I'm a bit lost as to what to do next, and I would really like some help. I know that the laws are different in every state, but I'm in Chicago, Illinois, and I don't know what he's capable of, so please, if you know what I should do or have any advice, then I would really love to hear from you. So I'm an indigenous person, and I don't only believe in this stuff, but I've also had an encounter. I was driving about 12 miles deep on the dirt roads, County Road 5047 to be exact. The sun was setting and I saw a dog, but the strangest thing is that it was running in circles. And then when I came up on it, it started to do zigzags and turned around and looked at me at one point. And that was when I noticed that the tongue of all things was dramatically off. It didn't look like a dog tongue, it looked a lot like a human tongue. And that was when I started to feel a bit weird. I felt like death and I felt sick all of a sudden. So I sped past it, and in my rearview mirror, the dog started chasing me. I must have sped up to 40 and it kept pace with me for some time, but as I got away, not even 5 minutes later, a Navajo police car passed me heading in that direction. I always wondered what he must have seen or why he was going that way in the first place. Maybe he was just going home, or maybe he got a report or something, but I just got out of there as quickly as I could because the whole situation felt very ominous. By the time the sun set, I was in Ute Mountain Nation and it got scary dark all of a sudden. Like, not your typical darkness, but it was absolutely black that night. I'm just glad that I got out of there before the dark fell and before whatever that thing was may have gotten any closer. So this is usually a story that I save for my partners, but it seems appropriate to share here. For those of you who aren't familiar, there's a big black market for car gas in Mexico. cartels intercept tanks in the middle of the highways and steal them, and then resell them for cheaper and make a deal with the owners of the gas stations so they can keep a profit without going through the legal company, essentially partnering with the cartel. About 10 years ago, though, when I was 16, my dad owned a few gas stations. He has always been well connected and steers clear from any corruption. He goes as far as to avoid anyone involved in the drug business or who has any ties to it. And well, at the time, 10 or 11 years ago, my parents are divorced and I'm used to seeing my dad on a daily basis. He comes to my house and gets out of the passenger seat of his car, and in the driver's seat was a shady, scary-looking dude that was certainly not our driver. My dad and I go on a walk around the block and the shady dude starts following him. My dad tells him to stay put, but we're just taking a quick walk. I immediately ask my dad, who the heck is that and why is he following him? I'm not going to say that it was a smart move on my dad's part to tell me, as I was filled with anxiety for months, but I was also glad to be aware of the situation. It turns out that the scary dude is a bodyguard that he'd hired. A cartel had approached him and asked if he wanted a deal on gas and they would split the profits. When my dad declined, they made it clear that it was not a question and that they'd be coming after him unless he changed his mind. Spoiler alert, he didn't. This meant that he couldn't go to the office. If he did, he had to take different routes, and we had to meet in different places, and he was always on the lookout for anyone who might be following him. I thought that I was going to cry hearing all of this, to be honest. It's never fun to learn your family is in a life-threatening situation, in Mexico of all places, but remember how I mentioned that my dad is well connected? Well, it turns out he knew someone deep inside the intelligence agency in the country, and they started an in-depth investigation into all of this. 3 months later, and my dad had returned to pretty much normal life, as they had assessed the risk and dealt with it apparently, but he had to always remain aware and constantly change his route still. We're all safe and dandy now, and if my dad ever got another death threat, he chose not to make me aware of it. But man, those were some scary months to say the least. Like I said, I rarely tell this story because even thinking back on it causes me a lot of anxiety and fear. I'm really glad that my family always taught me to stay as far away as humanly possible to anyone involved in any sort of shady business. So, some other people have asked me to share more of my experiences regarding the time that I spent in the cult, paranormal encounters that started happening in the home, and when we moved to the same town as the leaders, even more started to happen too. To recap, I've shared some experiences already. The first was when my friend and I saw two small beings coming out of a field at 3 a.m. in long brown robes with bald heads, identical to each other. The second experience was when another friend and fellow cult member and I saw a large, blacker-than-black being fly over our heads. It was formless and about 8 to 9 feet across, and when I say formless, I mean it had no distinguishable features, no head or eyes or arms or legs or anything. This happened in the alleyway between our house and the cult leader's house too. So, another experience that I had was a little different to those. During our time in the cult, the leaders decided that I should move in with them. I think I mentioned this in a previous story too. They had 5 teenage girls living there at the time. I was one of them. One evening I was doing my homework on the kitchen table with the same friend who saw that flying black creature with me, when suddenly, out of nowhere, my back started stinging. And I mean really burning sort of stinging. I was irritated by it and was trying to reach around to feel what was going on. Finally, after a minute or so, I asked my friend to have a look as it was really starting to bug me. I roll up my shirt and she stares at my back in confusion. I ask her what she sees and she tells me that I have 3 long scratches down my back. They look like cat scratches, but much too big to be a cat scratch. The scratches were spaced apart too wide to be a cat, and they also didn't have a cat anyway. She seemed quite freaked out by it, so I go to the bathroom to view it myself. They're pretty much centered down my back, and also behind my bra strap. and there was just no way that I could reach that. To be honest, I wasn't too worried at the time though. I mean, I just figured that it had somehow happened earlier and I was only feeling it then for some reason. But then this happened again, a couple of months later approximately. I was playing a computer game at the desk in the room that me and two other girls shared, and when I felt that sting or burning sensation again, exactly like before as well. Again, I try to reach around and feel what was going on. I go to the bathroom and lift my shirt. I see 3 scratch marks again, very similar to the ones before, but not quite as long and a little off to the side this time. I was a little worried this time, but told myself that it must be due to the clothing that I'm wearing or something. I put it out of mind and never thought about it until years later when I heard about this phenomena happening to many others too. The next one happened before I moved out. My sister and I were in her room in the basement. It was late morning. Next to her room is the utility room and then the stairs going up. Her bedroom door was closed and we were just chatting and hanging out in her room. We were about to go upstairs when, out of nowhere, we hear this growl or roar coming from the utility room area. It wasn't like any growl that I can explain because it wasn't like a dog growl or a big cat growl or anything. If I had to describe it though, it had that sort of deep low sound of a large cat, like a lion or a tiger perhaps, and it had a similar volume to a large cat as well, but maybe closer to a bear maybe? It's hard to explain, but when I first heard it, I was so confused and immediately frightened, obviously. My mind was racing, wondering how on earth I was hearing what sounded like a wild animal in the house. We didn't have a dog either, by the way, but then my mind went to, it must be someone walking a large aggressive dog outside, even though it didn't sound like a dog, and the sound is carrying through the walls weirdly or something. I was trying to make sense of it is what I'm saying, but something primal inside kicked off, I think, and because I became filled with dread, the growling got louder and it sounded like it was making its way towards her door. I looked to my sister with panic and see that she is frozen on the spot. Her face was filled with fear and also confusion. I remember actually wanting to escape out of her bedroom window at that point. My sister told me to stop and be quiet, but I couldn't. The growling was getting louder and closer and seemed to be right outside the door now. I couldn't just do nothing as well, so I started screaming for my mum, just calling out to her over and over. The growling immediately stopped when I did that too. I keep my screaming up for a minute or so and then I stop and we listen. There's no growling anymore and it's totally silent. My heart is pounding and I tell my sister that we have to run out. She tries to stop me, but I open the door anyway. I quickly look around and we don't see anything, so I race upstairs with my sister right behind me. We run to my mum and we tell her. Another incident that happened involved a time again when I was in my sister's room. I had decided to sleep in her room that night. We had just gotten into bed and were talking, and almost as soon as our conversation ended, when the room was totally silent, a voice came from the end of the bed and broke that silence. It was a loud whisper, and it said my name as clear as day, just my name, nothing else. I couldn't tell if the voice was male or female, but it was just a very loud whisper. I immediately grabbed my sister and said her name. I was completely freaked out, obviously, and she responded right away and said, I heard it too. At that, I was terrified. I clung to her trying to process what we heard and what could be the possible cause, and she said that we mustn't give it attention. I couldn't stay there though, so I got up to get a glass of water and to calm down. I slept on the couch that night too, and I was just completely terrified the entire night. Anyway, I'll have to share more stories another time because this is already getting a bit long, but yeah, those are just some of the experiences that I had there at that cult. I still don't know how to explain many of them, but they are things that just stay with you, I guess. I've been an avid camper most of my life. and more that I actually lived in the Wyoming wilderness for almost 2 years as a child, in a house on a nature preserve. It was a place where electricity was only available by generator, and we had to boil water that me and my siblings carried up from the creek. All of this was before I was even 10 years old, and if there were emergencies, it would be at least an hour before we could get to help or help could get to us. I've hunted dangerous game before as well, not particularly proud of it to be honest, but it happened, and also seen some weird stuff in the desert. So when I say that I will not venture into the woods of the Cascadia mountain range alone, it's important to know that the wilderness doesn't frighten me easily. So I was 23 years old when a friend of mine, his name was Darren, invited me to a camping trip. The site was a place a few miles up a logging road, so about an hour-long hike from an already back road of a back road. It was just me, Darren, and his good friend Wade. The place was, from the logging road, about 10 minutes down a trail. The moment that we got to the site, I was excited. The small lake was beautiful, barely touched by people over the years. It also comforted me somewhat when we got there to see that within the last month, at least somebody else had camped out there, extra wood by the fire pit. We ate a bunch of chili and hot dogs, but around dusk the guys went off into the woods and they came back with a sealed bucket that they had buried the year before, and we opened it to get some of the MREs that we had stowed in their cache there. It was all in all looking to be one of the better camping trips that I've had in my adult life. That night, though, was a bit different. For the first time in my life, I felt, an uneasiness sleeping in my tent. I couldn't quite place it, but chalked it up to just not being used to camping without my dad. Darren bought his .38 special for protection from predators, but he was the only one armed. Anyway, the next day it rained, as it does in the PNW, and we tried to wait it out, but eventually called it quits, packed up, and we just went home. But fast forward to the next year, me and Darren get the itch to go camping again, and I wanted to give that site another shot. In fact, I spent a great deal of effort convincing a bunch of my friends to tag along. In the end, it wound up being 6 of us and a big white German shepherd. Me, Darren, Wade, James, Charles, and Rita, James's girlfriend, and Moogie, the dog. Knowing about the uneasiness felt the last time, though, I brought my 12-gauge this time. James wanted to get some unregulated target practice in as well, shooting stuff that they don't allow at official gun ranges, like full cans and gallon jugs and stuff. We also brought a quad with us this time so that we could haul a bunch of extra water, booze, and other supplies to make our weekend more comfortable. The first day, though, as we're setting up, we hear a loudspeaker playing some music over by the south end of the lake, which was basically right next to the logging road, and this could be seen from the road, unlike the year prior. So, deciding that we're just being, Americans, me and James saunter down to meet the source of the noise pollution. Now, I have to commend the coolness of the cop that was just having a fishing trip, when 2 large, armed men, me with the 12-gauge, James with his 308, emerged from the tree line. We introduced ourselves, though, mentioned the others, but not exactly where we were camping, just that it was nearby. And that was when stuff got creepy. It could have just been cops doing cop stuff, but this guy really wanted to know exactly where we were going to be. Then he mentioned his favorite spots nearby, and really wanted us to try these other 2 spots more miles down the logging road. At that point, it was almost like, he was suggesting that that was the only spot where we wouldn't be in trouble. Darren showed up finally, though, told us that he spoke to the landowner several years ago and they were fine with us being there. And the cop was mad, but we lied and said that we'd check out the site that he was pushing. None of us trusted the guy when we left, so we decided not to in the end. It was, like a horror movie setup almost. The whole shady cop tells us to go to the spot where his hillbilly friends are going to kidnap us kind of vibe. So we move on, though, pretty early in the day, so we set up our stuff, get a fire going, we float around in our giant 4-person inflatable chairboat thing, The biggest highlight of the day was Charles cut down an entire dead tree with nothing but a small axe, like the midway point between a hatchet and a fireman's axe, I guess, but it was an impressive feat of stamina and strength. It was a good day leading into a good night, but right after it got dark, again, I just felt uneasy. The first thing that worried me was a couple of us heard something big splash into the far side of the lake. We thought maybe that it was Moogie, but he was by the fire at this point, his head now perked up and looking in the direction of the splash. Since we were pretty drunk, we thought maybe the floaty thing might just be compromised, so we went down with the flashlights to pull it out of the water and onto the bank. And then we heard the owl. Charles, Wade, and Darren were already passed out by midnight. Rita was humming along by the fireplace with Moogie, and me and James were out getting some more wood so the fire would last all night, when we heard an owl start up its hooting. It was a cadence that I was familiar with in this area, but something was off about it. I have a bit of a gift for mimicking bird noises, so what I noticed immediately is the ending hoot was sort of off. It almost always sounds like the owl is rolling its R's as the final hoot of the sequence goes. James, not really as outdoorsy as me, says, "That almost sounds like a person, you know." We end up joking, listen to it a couple more times, then I do my own attempt at an owl noise. Silence. For a few minutes, just as I'm thinking that makes sense because of the noises, it starts up again. But not just one owl. Another started up about half a second after the first. The new owl sounding more like an actual owl than the first one that seemed to have started up again. And after the first hoot from the real owl, the fake one stopped short. James jokes again and says, "Did that owl just tell the other owl to shut up?" I decided to shout, "Better listen to your wife, dude." Immediately after I shout, we both hear a loud crashing though, almost identical to the sound of the tree falling that Charles did earlier that day. And at this, Moogie starts to go absolutely berserk, barking and growling. He had a stink gland issue at this point still, so he was releasing that nastiness as well, and he was threatened, and luckily Rita was there to keep him from bolting. Big as he was, if he really wanted to move, she wouldn't have been able to do much, but I'm absolutely in fear at this point. I will reiterate too that I have hunted mountain lions and bears in my life, and at no point during those hunts was I as shaken and genuinely afraid as this. I was paralyzed for like an entire minute. I shout across the lake, "Whoever that is, you better get lost because we have plenty of guns." Then, silence again. Luckily too, for the rest of the night. I didn't fall asleep until Darren woke up, basically at sunrise, so I missed breakfast and a morning dunk in the lake. The others all did before I got up, needing to go to the toilet real bad. James had already explained the noises to the others by the time that we were all ready for our different adventures. Darren, Wade, and Rita just wanted to listen to the radio and chill. Moogie had run off just after lunch, and we decided to go look for him while also investigating the area of the noises last night. But almost immediately, when we get to the other side of the lake, the hair stands up on the back of my neck. Charles also feels creeped out, but he had an axe. I had a shotgun, and James also had a rifle and his .45 holstered on his hip. So we pressed onward, looking for probably a couple of hours. I was mainly trying to see if we could spot any trees that had fallen, but then we made it to the eastern bank of the lake, and we were camped on the western side. "What the?" Charles says, causing me and James to come rushing over. There, we saw what looked like a human footprint. Just one, but it was very clearly a footprint in the mud, even had a little pool of water still in it too. Now, to be honest, my first thought was Bigfoot, so I took off my boot and compared sizes. I'm a pretty big guy with pretty large feet as well, so it wasn't a surprise that my clodhoppers dwarfed this footprint when I put my own print down next to it. But what was weird was that the other print, where the pinky toe would be, looked like, I don't know, like another big toe maybe. We also found several downed trees, but none that looked recent, so We decided to go around to the North Lake and back to the others and do a sort of full circle around. Moogie was fine, and as soon as food smells filled the air, he came running back. And we all had a pretty good day again, to be honest. Drinking, feasting, and making fun of each other for being paranoid. We heard some gunshots a little close that day, and then called out to warn the shooters that there were people and animals nearby. The shooters of us actually went to meet the people, and all of us but Darren and Wade joined the old guy and his wife shooting at whatever we could. Part of me was thinking that anything that was lurking around here sure as heck would not mess with us now. But boy, was I completely wrong about that. So, a brief mention about Charles. Ever since we were kids, Charles has had vivid night terrors. Most of the time, it's just funny, but some of the time it's actually a bit scary. He'd full-on sleepwalk as well and have conversations with you even while still asleep, but anyway, we had all gone to bed and I was one of the first due to getting like 4 hours sleep and being quite rum drunk at this point. "Hey, who's that? Captain, stay in your tent." Charles, who was sleeping on a tarp by the fire instead of in a tent, said, or I should say shouted at this point. I shot up, grabbed the shotgun, and turned on my flashlight. "What's wrong?" I shout. Adrenaline filled my entire existence. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears. "Come closer to the fire. No, don't crouch down. Use your words." He keeps shouting, finally stirring awake James and Rita, who were in the tent closest to Charles. "What the?" James calls out. Moogie starts growling and apparently let off the stink gland again in their tent because him and Rita are like, "Oh, Moog, gross," but then I hear, "There's somebody sneaking up on Captain's tent. Get out here." I start to unzip my tent. "Not you, Captain. Stay in there. He's right next to you." Now, everybody else to this day denies hearing this, but I swear that I heard something whisper "Captain" before hearing a twig crunch right outside of my tent. James makes it out of his tent, and seconds later, I hear him laughing. It's just the water stump. Charles is having a night terror. But then, Charles claimed that he wasn't dreaming. But when I got out and I shined the light on the stump, he agreed that that had to be it. We put one of those big sort of jugs of water on the top of a stump, and it could easily be mistaken for a white shirt standing in the dark. Satisfied, too, that there wasn't actually anything there. Despite my protests, we all went back to bed. Charles stayed in the tent for the rest of the night, and I decided to spend the rest of the night on watch. That, though, was one of, if not the most terrifying nights of my life, because I heard more activity in those woods than I had heard before. Moogie, too, would wake up and barf multiple times as I'd hear twigs snapping off in the trees. Then I heard a really big snap that had to have only been about 10 feet away. At that, I jumped to my feet, whipped over to where the noise was, and shined my light. Now, I've seen enough deer butt in my life to know what I saw running from me. What was not normal of the deer, however, is that they don't stand up and run off on their two legs like that. Moogie howled and snarled. I took aim, letting my light drop, and I just fired. I didn't care that it turned to run. I just unloaded. There were booms straight until I ran out of all 6 shells that I had loaded. Everyone else was freaking out and rushed out of their tents. I told them what happened, and after that, nobody went back to bed until the morning. Thankfully, nothing else happened that night, and I think Moogie refusing to leave the tent was what allowed the others to take me seriously enough. He was a brave dog after all, sweet, and if other dogs messed with him at the park, he knew how to throw down, but this night, he was different. The last thing that happened too on that last day was that Darren and Wade went to go bury the bucket after putting some fresh new supplies in it. They had always known where the cache was buried because there was a different stump that they used as a landmark. And that entire stump was just gone. It was there when we retrieved the cache 2 days prior, but now it had vanished. No signs of it being uprooted, mind you, dragged or even disturbed. It simply was as if it just never existed. We genuinely all thought that we had just made a mistake too, until we found the hole for the bucket that we'd made before, still dug and with the little poncho stuffed in it. And that just made absolutely no sense to us. Well, I'm never coming back here now, so we may as well take this stuff with us, Darren said, and after that we all agreed and we all just left after lunch. So, that is why I will never go hiking in the Cascade Wilderness, at least without a firearm, and at least 2 other people who know how to use them. I don't know what all that was about that night when we were camping at that place, but whatever it was, I'll never forget it. So this happened 10 years ago now, but I still remember it vividly. This was when I was 18 years old and lived with my parents and siblings in a small town that was right near the Rocky Mountains in Canada. It was summertime and maybe about 11:30 at night. It was a clear night with good visibility too. We no longer live in that town, but we aren't too far from it now too. My friend, who was 17 at the time, also lived with us, and she was with me and saw what I saw as well. So, at the time, my family and I were part of what we have now come to know as a cult. This is relevant to the story because it was why we were out late, and my parents' door was locked as well. Me and my friend were told that we had to live with the leaders of the cult at this time. It's irrelevant to go into why for this story, but the cult leader's house was across the back alleyway and a few houses down from the parents' house. We didn't want to live with them, so we would spend as much time as possible at my parents' house and leave very late at night to go to the cult leader's house. Like I said too, it was around 11:30 at night, summertime, clear night, when we leave my parents' back door to head to the cult leader's house. And my mum locks the door behind us, turns off the lights, and I assume goes to bed. My friend and I walk out through our backyard and are in the alleyway. Our backyard has no fence to it, it just goes straight into the alleyway. But we turn left as the cult leader's house is a few houses down and across the alleyway, with a sort of slow incline and a bend. I'm hoping that makes visual sense, but behind us, the alleyway stretches a good 5 or so houses back, straight. And right as we step into the alleyway, we hear garbage cans from behind us, about a few houses distance behind us, being knocked around. I can only describe this like, imagine someone clumsily knocking into them and trying to stop them from falling down, but they keep knocking them in any case. Because we live right near the mountains, we're used to a ton of wildlife in the town. Bears, cougars, sometimes even moose. So my initial instinct is that it's a bear and we've startled it while it was getting into someone's garbage. I immediately panic and am wondering if we go back through the yard and bang on my parents' back door that's locked, or if we make a quick break for the cult house because it's most certainly unlocked. I'm making these calculations very split second because it's all happening so quickly. My friend starts saying my name over and over and grabbing my arm. She's looking back towards the garbage cans while I'm trying to plan what to do. Then, all of a sudden, she screams and I look over my shoulder without really any time to think or process at all. And then I see it. It was huge and flying. It swooped over our heads, maybe 4 feet above us, and continued up higher, maybe getting to about 15 feet. Again, no time to think, we were both just screaming and yelling at this point. But here's the kicker. It flew right towards the cult leader's house. It banked between cult leader's house and the house beside it, and flew out of sight. When it banked, we had a really clear view of it too, as the streetlights across the alleyway sort of illuminated it well. And I'll describe what it looked like and how, to this day, I just cannot fathom that it could be anything other than paranormal. So its wingspan was about 8 to 9 feet long, maybe larger even. It was inky black. I mean, just totally the darkest black that I can describe. I've never seen anything like it before or since, color-wise. It had no distinguishable features, no feathers, no head, no eyes, no beak, no legs, nothing. The best way that I can describe it, in fact, is that if you imagine sort of like a huge stingray, minus the tail and much, much larger, longer wings. My friend describes it like, imagine a shadow of a large flying creature, but a much more solid, darker shadow. It wasn't transparent. Like, if you touched it, you would feel it for sure, or at least you would think you would. Mind you, it made no sound, other than the smashing of the garbage cans, so it definitely was a physical being, and flew so beautifully, so smoothly, I guess you could say. The way it banked between the houses was so effortless, and with it being so large, it was impressive. Anyway, we were totally stunned, shocked, and really, really frightened. We stood there for a short time watching to see if it would come back, but it never did. Eventually, we gathered ourselves and decided to go to the cult house, even though that was the way the creature went, because the door would be unlocked. And when we got inside, we immediately went to one of the leaders. It was the woman. There were two, a man and a woman, and told her everything as best as we could, totally freaked out and shaken up. And when we were finished, she paused and looked at us for a while with a strange look on her face, and simply said, and I remember this verbatim, "Where there is great light, there will be great darkness." And then she just walked off. My friend and I stayed up for hours by the front door looking out, wondering if we would see it again, but we never did, and we never actually saw it again afterwards either. I have, since that experience, attempted to Google on quite a few occasions, and really haven't found anything even remotely similar to what we saw that night. So, I guess my question for all of you guys is, has anyone potentially seen anything like this? Or does anyone have any insight? If you do, then I would love to hear from you. Also, thank you a lot for hearing me out. So this happened to me as a teen. I must have been about 16 years old at the time, so maybe about 12 years ago. My sister and I were having two friends stay over for a sleepover one night. It was in the middle of the summer and we lived in a tiny town, actually a hamlet, and was surrounded by prairies, lots of farmland. My sister and the one friend, they fell asleep fairly early on in the night, but my other friend and I stayed awake chatting for a while. We had our mattress on the floor, right by the three big windows in my sister's room. We're on the second floor. These windows looked out to the street below, and then across the street, to our left, was an elementary school. The parking lot for that school was in the middle of our view, and then next to the parking lot, more towards our right, was a farmer's field. So we stay up chatting until 2:33 in the morning. Windows are wide open as there's a lovely warm breeze coming in. And suddenly, my friend stops the conversation and says something like, "Oh, who's that?" I follow her gaze and see that she's looking toward the farmer's field. I see two figures coming out of the field. It's obviously dark and they haven't yet come into the streetlights, so I can't make out any features yet, but I assume it's just some of the kids in the neighborhood. My friend and I continue to watch in silence as these two people make their way into the streetlights and start coming directly toward the house. Now, I really assume that it's someone that I know because there's a few teen boys that would often be out late and would come to the house and talk to me and my sister from the window sometimes. As they're getting closer, we begin to make out their appearance, and I was absolutely shocked at how they looked. These two individuals couldn't have been taller than 5 feet. They were identical in all features that we could make out anyway, and I mean absolutely identical. They were both Caucasian, white-colored. They both had totally bald heads, and they were both wearing the same long brown robe with a tie at the waist. How I would describe it is that they sort of looked like they were in monk attire, I guess. They honestly just look like little people. Even though they clearly don't look like anyone that I know as they're coming towards the house, I begin to call out to them in a sort of loud whisper like, hey you, and then I start yelling out names of the different people in town that I know. I think I was in a bit of disbelief and thought that maybe it was a prank or something. All the while, my friend is totally stunned into silence. These beings make it just up to my parents' cars parked outside, so we have a very clear view of them at this point, and then they immediately turn on themselves and go back in the direction towards the field. They never once acknowledged my calls, too. They didn't even seem to look up. But they also appeared to be in discussion with each other, though my friend and I didn't make out any sounds coming from them. We continue to watch them make their way back across the road, and then, instead of going back into the field, they start walking down the road. We watch them until, well, we can just no longer see them. If you follow that specific road, it just leads to more fields, mind you, and away from any houses. My friend and I stayed up for another hour talking about what the heck we saw. She's a pretty devout Christian, so believes that it was demonic. Me, personally, I have no idea. It very well could have been demonic, I suppose, but it's also just so, I don't know, random. The next day we told everyone, and they all seemed kind of freaked out by it, even my parents. And I just have so many questions. Like, why did they come towards the house, only then to turn back on themselves? I've wondered if they intentionally did it. Like, they knew that we were there and wanted us to see them or something. Why were their appearances absolutely identical? Why bald, short? Why the brown robes? Also, what's up with them being out at like 3 a.m. in a field? I have Googled and I haven't been able to find much. I did find an obscure YouTube video of a lady saying that she was visited by 7 beings that sound exactly like what my friend and I saw, but I haven't found anything else. This lady said that they're interdimensional beings that know the future, apparently. I don't know about that, but anyways, I would love to hear if anybody else has seen these beings or what your thoughts are. And thanks for listening. So thankfully, I've since moved out of the spooky apartment where a few of my experiences took place. However, on my final day of moving, our spectral roommate decided to give me one last fright. I had returned to grab the last boxes, lock up the doors, and pass the keys off to the landlord. I was alone in the apartment with my sister waiting for me in the car outside. I'd been making trips up and down, bringing the last of our stuff, and finally there was just one box upstairs, in the back room. I went into the room to grab the box, and somehow this box had been completely unpacked and refolded. The part that freaked me out, though, is that the box contained statuettes of various Greek and Roman deities. These statuettes were pulled from the box, individually unwrapped, and placed facing backwards along the wall or on the floor where the table that had held them used to sit. Why backwards? That part seemed really strange to me. I mean, I could understand not wanting us to take them with us, perhaps, so laying them out again makes sense, sort of. But why backwards? Anyway, the door had been locked, and I helped my girlfriend pack that box. I distinctly remember taping it shut even, and pushing it against the wall near the door. Even if my landlord had randomly decided to check our progress on the move or something like that and came into the house, there's just no way that there would have been enough time to do that. Plus, why would he unpack our stuff? I asked the downstairs neighbor on our way out if he'd heard anything, but he hadn't. Now, the reason why I started with this was that before the move I was working at a country club. My work usually had me downstairs alone in the basement prep kitchen, and on my first day, one of the senior employees gave me a quick tour of the place, which was massive and easy to get lost in. The employee's name was G, and she was very hesitant to take me to the basement prep kitchen for some reason. She even asked another senior employee if he would show me the basement kitchen instead, but he was busy, so she got stuck with it. So we make our way down the stairs around some corners, and we wind up in a small kitchen. The kitchen is surrounded by a well-lit, well-used storage, a sort of dishwashing area. a dim and barely used dining hall, and a big set of double doors that led to the sub-basement storage. Like I said, the place was way too big. The layout is kind of important though, so to be brief and accurate, if you're standing in the front, there's a prep table to your left, and on the other side of which is the well-lit dish storage. To the right is another prep table against a wall. On the other side of the wall is the entrance to the dim dining hall and the double doors to the sub-basement. So, while working the prep station, you can see the dish and the storage area, but not the dining hall or the sub-basement doors. They were around the corner, so to get to the dining hall, you'd have to cross in front of the sub-basement door. Now, during my little tour, G had told me that she doesn't like going down here at all and that she absolutely refuses to go into the dining hall alone or the sub-basement at all. But we joked a little bit about how spooky it was down there, but then her tone got really serious and she said to me, "No, but seriously, stay away from the doors and ignore anything you hear from down there, alright?" Straight out of a horror movie, but okay, I guess. My first day on the job, I'm not asking dumb questions about spooky sub-basements. So I worked my first shift without incident, as well as the next 2 weeks without any problems. But on the first day of my third week, I went down to the basement prep to start working. It was 3 in the afternoon and I was pretty excited about that day as we'd had an event going on and it'd be my first time working an action station. So I wasn't thinking about spooky basement doors or anything, just happily slicing ham for the day and thinking about the night to come. But over the hum of the slicer, I thought I heard one of my co-workers walk behind me. I even thought that I saw a flicker of movement on my right. I thought it was weird that they were headed that way. I hadn't seen anybody go into the sub-basement or dining hall yet, but I figured that they were probably grabbing something for the event, so I just kept slicing. But that's when I heard a loud thump, like someone had taken a rubber dodgeball and threw it against a door. It made me jump, and I wasn't sure where it came from, so I turned off the slicer and I listened closely. I didn't hear it again, so I just went back to switch on the slicer. But, right as I touched it, there was another thump. For sure that time, too, I knew that it came from around the corner, by the sub-basement and the dining hall. In my mind, it was obvious that someone must have gotten stuck in the basement or dining hall and needed me to open the door for them. So I pulled off my gloves and I went around the corner to check which door they needed open. I tried the dining hall door first and poked my head in, but there wasn't anyone waiting on the other side. It was dim in there, but the room was empty, except for the few tables pushed against the walls, so I closed the door and moved over to the sub-basement doors, which had a small window set above each doorknob, kind of like the doors they have on classrooms and such. But when I tried the door, it was locked. I thought that it was weird to keep the door locked like that, but then I remembered what G had said, and I got a little spooked, I must admit. I started to walk away from the door when I heard that same thump, only twice as loud, against the doors, both of them, behind me. I wanted to keep walking too, but my brain told me to turn around and look. The doors were still shut and I couldn't see anything through the window from where I stood. I was very freaked out though at that point and decided to take an early break to have a smoke. While out on break, I talked to another co-worker of mine whom we call JJ. He'd been employed at the club for over 10 years, so I asked him about the sub-basement, and once again the tone changed, and he just sort of looked down and away and said, "Just don't go back down there. I've been here for 10 years, and I've only gone down there once." Now, hearing Jay talk like that was really weird. He was a large tattooed ex-bouncer, not the kind to be scared of even a bear, much less a spooky dark basement. So I finished my smoke and begrudgingly went back down to finish my prep. Now extra motivated to get it done quickly. I came down the stairs and as I was rounding the corner to head down the hall to the kitchen, I saw someone clear as day way down at the other end walk around the corner headed to the basement and the dining hall. They looked to be wearing all black clothes and a black cap. which is the kitchen staff uniform, so I thought for sure that that was one of my co-workers looking for me or something, so I called out to them. "Hey, I'm over here. What do you need?" There was no response, so I thought maybe they didn't hear me, so I kept going past my station and round the corner to find no one standing there. I poked my head in the dining hall again, and of course, I didn't find anyone. Now, I was legitimately terrified and started to freak out a bit. I started to head back to my station, where once again I heard the loud thumps against the doors. This time, it occurred to me that it must be my chef messing with me. He was a notorious prankster, and there's always a bit of hazing when it comes to new kitchen crew. He must get everybody with this gag. Jay had to be in on it, and G must have been another victim or something. But that was my thought process when I turned around and walked to the doors and put my face up against the glass and cupped my hands around it to block out the glare. I couldn't see anything through the black at all, not even the first few stairs, which I thought was weird. Shouldn't I at least be able to, see a little bit of light? Shouldn't a little bit of light be able to make it through the window from the hallway lights? I mustered up my bravest voice and shouted, "Very funny, Chef B, but I see you." I waited for a response, but nobody said anything. But I did start to get a really weird feeling, like I was standing next to an electrical charge or something, is the only way that I can describe it. It was like I was getting sort of tickled by TV static. That's the only way that I can describe it, but that's how it felt. I pulled my face away from the window and glanced behind me to make sure that nobody was there trying to sneak up on me. And when I put my face back to the glass, my heart instantly dropped, because I could now see the stairs. Which means that as I was peeking through the glass, someone or something was standing right on the other side, blocking out the light from the hallway and giving the illusion that I was looking into darkness. The only problem with that is whoever or whatever it was would have to have been rather large to block the whole window in its entirety. With that realization, I practically sprinted through the basement and back up the stairs to the main kitchen, where I found the entire kitchen crew happily at work, even Chef B. I told Jay about what had happened, and G must have overheard me because she just quietly said, "I told you to ignore anything you heard down there." And it was soon after this that some weird things were happening in my apartment. Thankfully, nothing has happened since I moved, but that box being unpacked, that was definitely freaky.